calling the Quality of Life Committee for February 2nd, 2022 to order. May I please get a roll call?
Yes, ma'am. Chair Councillor Cassette.
Present.
Councillor Villarreal.
Present.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Councillor Lee Garcia.
I'm here.
Councillor Chavez.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. On to approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
I do not have any changes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Loretta. Any changes from the committee? And if not, can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
Second. Thank you so much. And a roll call, please, Ms. Martin.
Yes, ma'am. Councillor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Lee Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chavez.
Yes.
Chair Cassette.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. And then on to approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that committee members would like to pull? Councillor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to pull item B and C.
Thank you. Councilwoman Villarreal, did you have some?
Same for me. Thank you.
Any others that anyone would like to pull? And if not, can I get a motion to approve as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Can we please get a roll call?
Yes. Councillor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councillor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Lee Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Chavez.
Yes.
Chair Cassette.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. Moving on to item 5, approval of minutes, and I'm not seeing any minutes here. So we will skip that for today, and then at our next meeting, we will have to approve the minutes from last time. So moving on to item 6, presentations. The first one that we have is the Alternative Response Unit update, and I have that Kira Ochoa and Chief Moya, Chief Mercado, and Chief Joy should all be here to present. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm here to present to you on our Alternative Response Unit project, which, as many of you know, we started going live with in May, although it was many years in the making in some ways. It's been a really successful collaboration within the Community Safety Department between Community Services, which provides funding and some sort of just a little bit of lighting of the fire behind the project, and then fire department and the MIHO team and the police department. All throughout the project, we've worked very closely, meeting weekly. In many cases, we're less in need of that now, to tweak the project to make sure that we're delivering the best service to the community in the best way. As you'll hear tonight, this is not a model that we plucked from a impose on Santa Fe. It's something that we very much grew from the needs that the public safety folks were seeing on the ground, as well as the social services folks. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Paul Joy from the Santa Fe PD.
Hello, everyone. Paul Joy, Interim Chief of Police. Just a quick refresh. To recap on Director Ochoa and tap on what she said before. Yeah, this has been what I'm a fan of with this program, is that this started with conversations that we've been having individually for several years now. And back in 2021, the beginning of 2021, we came together and started having these discussions as a group. And we didn't take someone else's program. We analyzed and looked at a few other programs that were operating in other parts of the country. But we took what we thought was best from those programs and created our own, started it from the ground up, and it's been kind of evolving to where we see the issues and multitasking here. Sorry, people don't leave me alone. So as we're seeing other needs, we're trying to adapt the program to include those needs. We're trying to integrate Thrive into ARU as well. I've got nothing but positive things to say with regard to what this program's been able to do so far. On the police department side, there's been a lot of discussion and from the community and internally as well about behavioral health, mental health. How do we get these folks into services that don't involve law enforcement, where the call is going to come in as a disorderly conduct, or the call is going to come in as a welfare check? Those are police department calls, but the police department is not necessarily the best people to handle those calls. But it's the person who's calling it in. It's mental health and behavioral health disguised as disorderly conduct. But we may not know that until we get more on scene, or the people who are reviewing the call can kind of parse out the information and make a determination as to where they think if ARU is the best fit, or if it's the police department that's the best fit for that call. But yeah, so with that, I'll pass it off to Chief Moya and leave you guys alone for a minute.
Madam Chair, councilors, thank you. Thank you for having us. Yeah, everything that Director Ochoa and Chief Joy said is correct. This program is working. It is accomplishing things. We've used it for multiple angles. It is running currently right now for Code Blue. So it is running till 10 o'clock tonight to help with that aspect of it. So it's working. Chief Mercado has done a great job. I throw him curveballs every once in a while and he's able to hit them. So we're accomplishing things. We've got a case manager supervisor we just hired. We hired another case manager. So we're almost fully staffed. We're still short 2 case managers, but the unit is working great. Everybody that is on it is accomplishing things. We're able to not have the PD officer on all the time due to the fact of the training that they were able to get. So we're moving in the right direction. And I think it's just continuously a growth thing and not move too fast, but we're moving to accomplish and try to get ARU2 up and running as soon as possible. So I think that it's a greater overall aspect. With that, I will turn it over to Chief Mercado. He will do the presentation and then we'll stand for questions after.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm going to start sharing my screen. My name is Andres Mercado, and I am a battalion chief with the fire department overseeing case management and response. Let's get this here. Okay, are you seeing the full slide or the presenter's view there?
We're seeing the full slide. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you and happy 2/22. I listened into the conversation about Harrison Road last night, and I don't live on Harrison, but I've spent quite a bit of time on the arroyos and encampments, and it's that issue is not limited to Pete's, it's not limited to Harrison, it's not limited to the 2800 block of Cerrillos Road or the city or the county. This is really, beyond the Southwest, it's a huge issue. I don't live on Harrison, but I've seen the outward symptoms of untreated mental illness from the burn scars in the arroyos and the trash, and the tents that pop up as quickly as they disappear. It's sad to see people suffering from untreated mental illness, and the amount of discomfort that they're treating with these pretty toxic cocktails in their bloodstream. And I understand also from the community perspective, the housed community members, I've had my house broken into twice here a couple of summers ago. I had a bag stolen out of the front seat of my car. So it's a super complicated issue, and it's definitely not limited to Pete's or Harrison Road. So just to get us started, I wanted to share a text text message that we got this morning. So we started running into this young man, we'll call him Robbie, a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. Pretty quiet, kept to himself, would always say thank you, God bless you, generally declined help, sleeping bags on cold nights, etc. And the ARU was on a call recently, and they actually ran into his mom, who was trying to bring him food and tennis shoes and stuff. We stayed in touch with his mom, with some merchants in the area who were kept keeping an eye out on him, and then and also with this individual. Over time, he became nonverbal. He had holes in his shoes, even though he had brand new shoes sitting right next to him. He would cover himself in a blanket, even though he had a sleeping bag right next to him. So very sad. And I think part of the sadness there is the contrast of having those brand new shoes right next to him and not having the wherewithal to put them on. And that's sort of what makes this case obvious and sad. But a lot of these folks that are out there on the street, they don't have new shoes to sort of put them in contrast with anything, or a mom that's looking out after them. And this is an email that we got shortly after William Brunson and one of our case managers, and I'm sorry, I don't know who it was, but I know it was William because of the letter. Just our family is so grateful to you and your kind assistance, and just it was very touching to read this email. We kept on working with this individual after mom was just thankful to have met us. And I'm happy to say that we got the text that's on the right-hand side this morning. I wish I could have just done a screenshot of the phone, but I'm not tech savvy enough. So this is just sort of, this is a very sad story. This gentleman was just out on the street, unmedicated. We hope that he's on a good path. But those folks that don't have that contrast, don't have that mom, there's a lot of them out there in the community. Their stories may not be as pull as much at the heartstrings, but it's the same really underlying issues of untreated mental illness. So the purpose of the alternative response unit was really to help residents and visitors get their help, the help that's appropriate, while at the same time alleviating the workforce, the workload on our police officers. So a little history. It was established in 2015. There was a resolution. Mayor Cos was involved on his way out. Mayor Gonzalez, Councilor Tuvera, Boucher, and Dimas, and all the councilors that were around back then. They essentially asked the fire department to explore the opportunities that existed at the overlap of healthcare, public health, and public safety. We looked at some data, and sort of the hot spotting pattern became very obvious, and it only reinforced what I had seen in my last 15 years or so on ambulances here in Santa Fe. And so the goal was to move from an episodic care to longitudinal care. So essentially connecting the dots, trying to make a story. Faith Applewhite, one of our EMS captains, says that, back when she was on the ambulance, she would think, how does this call fit into my life, into my shift? And that sort of the paradigm shift is now thinking, how do we fit into this person's life over time? So a move from reactive to proactive, from sort of transactional to transformational. Those are the words of Mayor Gonzalez, is sort of what the vision he had. And then it's embedded in everything because of this longitudinal nature. So we're working with merchants, we're working with providers, we're working with family members, we're working with the individuals, we're working with the police, the fire department, and also we're essentially just it's a completely embedded intervention that really allows us to be in contact with all these different touch points in the community. So we started work in case management, essentially, when we were just a staff of myself and Ramos Sosi and some folks on overtime. And it was really outreach before or after 911 calls. We weren't running any 911 calls. The ARU is sort of the first step of taking this longitudinal point of view and really operationalizing it into the 911 system. So we're actually, I'll talk a little bit at the end about new software we're going to, and we're hoping to bring that longitudinal view to the providers who are actually on scene. So the operations, it's one unit, currently 40 hours a week, Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. On holidays, it's voluntary overtime. Code Blue is voluntary overtime. As Chief Moya mentioned, they're on the streets tonight till 10 o'clock at night, and also tomorrow night until 10 o'clock at night. The vehicle that they're in is just a marked vehicle. This was Chief Joy's old vehicle, and we have Chief Martinez's old vehicle as a second unit, but it's a marked vehicle with police and fire radios. On it, we have a paramedic and a case manager, and they have 2 case managers sort of back. So for each unit, we have 3 case managers, 1 who's on the unit and 2 who are picking up. It's a referral generator. So they're picking up a lot of the referrals, and those 3 case managers rotate through. So all the case managers are sort of cross-trained. They have a caseload and then also interact with folks on a more response-oriented basis. We have a total of 12 FTEs. And just to put it in perspective, that's less than 1 fully staffed fire engine. And really that the team is so dependent on that case management team. Those 2 people that are not on the unit that are then working to sort of provide the follow-up outreach that is so desperately needed with some of these folks. This is an overview of the training. So general operations, crisis intervention training, 24 hours, MI, suicide prevention, trauma-informed care, human trafficking. Sorry, I'm reading this to you, but just to get through it quickly, I know we have a shortage of time. NAMI does an amazing job. They brought in Daniel Hershey, who has some pretty impressive experiences that he's very open with sharing. A lot of on-the-job training, and then we're hoping to partner to add some more things to our core training, including transgender cultural fluency and dementia care. We definitely recognize the vulnerability just jump when you're working with folks that are from the transgender community. So to get into a little bit of the data, just the numbers. So we started on Cinco de Mayo. This is the data through the end of the calendar year, 943 responses. And as you can see, the majority of calls, we have not had the police officer on the unit. Officer Gonzalez was on the unit for, I believe, the first couple of months, and pretty quickly we realized that having the police officer as an independent resource integrated with both patrol and the ARU made more sense, both from a clinical perspective to take care of folks and make sure that folks weren't triggered, and operational perspective for police. And we also determined that the safety, the way that the team was triaging calls for safety was very appropriate, and all parties felt like it was a good move. The nature of calls, so disorderlies and welfare checks make the bulk majority. Those are pretty big buckets that carry all sorts of undefined things. The dispatch complaint is, at least from my experience in the fire department, about 70% of the time it's accurate. And within being accurate, there's a lot of variability. So there's really quite a bit of variability in those calls. But mental illness, sort of strange behavior, checking on someone who hasn't been heard from in a few days, people spinning bicycle tires near the street, and all sorts of things. We screen those calls pretty carefully, and I can speak about that later if anyone is interested. The source of these calls, so primarily they're coming from the police console. So at the dispatch center, they take the calls, they triage them, and they decide police, fire, or both. So the black is police only, the blue is police and fire. The green is proactive encounters, when they're interacting with, run into folks they see, or sort of have an opportunity. We try to not focus too much on that because there's so much on the queue, but there are times when it is appropriate to stop and talk with somebody. The dark blue there is from the fire department console only. And a lot of those is just because we've been sort of close since we're out on the street already. Or we've been maybe requested by an on-scene unit. Services provided, a lot of referrals out. A lot of those are internal referrals. Like I said, there's sort of a referral generator. The one and done approach is sort of the opposite of what we'd like to do. So I don't know how good the graphics are there, and if you can read that, but meal and beverage is the second one. Alternate transport destination is the third. Opiate overdose and education is the third, the fourth, et cetera. We have not had to ask for backup. I mean, the times that we have had to ask for it, it's been very appropriate. Sometimes we're just first on scene on a call that turns out to be a medical call. So med normal means we requested an ambulance, normal traffic, no lights and sirens. PD normal means we requested a police officer, same thing, no lights and sirens. And sometimes there's just sort of unresolved things that we're not really clear on the legality of it. If someone's called truant from school and sort of who do we need to make contact with? So sometimes we allow where we request that law enforcement proceed. 2 ambulances, emergency traffic. One of them was the crew was first on scene for a person who everyone thought was passed out, who was in cardiac arrest, and they started CPR, dropped an airway, and started care, called an ambulance, got him transported to the hospital, and he had, I believe he's, he had pulses when he got to the hospital, and he was transferred over to a rehabilitation center. So I'm not sure what his current status is. And also first on scene to a major trauma at Cereals in St. Francis, a big motorcycle accident. But the point of that is that we're not just showing up on scene first and then asking for a bunch of people to come help. We're able to handle a lot of that stuff. The impact on PD. So we started tracking this in November. This is not comprehensive of the entire 6 months or so of this data. But as you can see, the calls, the bars that are in blue are calls that had from the police department console. The ones that are in white or gray aren't really sort of counted in the total PD calls. But so the majority of calls we're clearing without a police officer response. The PD response unchanged. Oftentimes that's because we're co-responding with them, or they're already on scene and they've requested us. It's something that we maybe didn't triage in, or for whatever reason, we didn't have the call. We were on another call and were then later requested. So obviously didn't change their response. And then the smaller blue one is police department officers put back in service by the area. The impact on the fire department, I got this from one of our battalion chiefs, Scott Outerkirk. He said that the impact on the volume is hard to capture because we're responding oftentimes when the call is still on the police screen. So there are many calls that the fire department in general responds to where police goes first. They identify a medical issue and then call for medics. So it's hard to understand really the impact there. That it's a very helpful resource to request. But that it is limited by availability, and that a bigger impact will be felt with more units. And that something that I was sort of pleased to hear is that it's a morale booster to just hear someone else helping out with some of these calls, especially when they're challenging and we may not have the right tools in the toolbox for managing the situation. So in conclusion, I hope I'm under the 10 minutes. It's really a new type of first responder. And I want to stress that the safety risk that's always brought up it's not zero. It's the first, even on an ambulance, I brushed up on people that were armed without police there. That's the environment that you're operating in. The training required for that, the schedule, the benefits, et cetera. It really is something, I think, something that for scalability and for recruitment and retention, we would be foolish to not really factor in that full package of what work we're asking these folks to do. Schizophrenia, bed bugs, Hep C, et cetera, being out there on these super cold nights, they're a new type of first responder and not just social workers running around helping people, even though they do that also. The goal is a triple aim, so improving outcomes, improving customer and employee satisfaction. I think there's a lot of vocational frustration, both on the law enforcement side and on the EMS side, for having nothing but a sledgehammer, and overall reduce system costs. So really sort of trying to tailor things and be fiscally responsible about how we're meeting the demand. Next steps, we're hoping to get an ARU2 up and running, and we're about to roll out a integrated emergency medicine, integrated health and fire software, which I hope will be super awesome and will allow us to really focus on community risk reduction, identify patterns, and interject in positive ways. And I want to just close out by giving a big thank you to the staff, to Ramos and Faith, and Nicole, Victoria, Matt, Sonia, Ray, and Felina, and now Adam, that they're really the ones that are able to make this happen, and want to thank you, and I'll stop sharing here and we'll stand for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chief Mercado. I really appreciate the presentation. I am sure that there will be a request for you to share that presentation with the members of the committee. So if you could send that out, we would much appreciate it. And do any members of the committee have any questions at this time? Councillor Chavez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is there a goal date for ARU2? Do you have a goal date for when you would want that to be rolled out?
Chief Moya, do you want to respond to that?
Madam Chair, Councillor Chavez, we're trying. We had some hiccups with hiring 2 more case managers. So I need the support staff in the office before I put ARU2 up in the street. It's just because we don't have the capacity to have ARU1 running. And if somebody calls in sick or is on annual leave, I need to have the ability to have the support in the office and on the unit. So we were shooting for April until we were unable to hire 2 case managers. So right now I'm re-advertising this week for 2 more case managers. And once we get them up and hired and enrolled and up to speed, we will, I don't want to give a timeline because every time I do, I get bit with that. So my goal is as soon as possible, as soon as we can prioritize it and do it safely. That's my key point is
Absolutely.
always is safety first and make sure that they're appropriately put on the unit and correct. So we're close and we'll get there soon.
Thank you, Chief Moya. Yeah, I think it's hard to put a timeline when it's dependent on hiring. So that was, going to be my second question. So thank you for your work. It's amazing. I think that ARU is helping us resolve some really important issues with so that we're not having to revisit them again, right? We're giving the help that's needed for long-term recovery. So thank you for your commitment and work to that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me, you all, because I'm having technical problems all day long. Thank you for the excellent presentation, Chief Mercado. I wish you would have presented this one at the task force. I think the visuals were very helpful. So if you send that to me, I can send it on to the members. I think this was visually, it was helpful to kind of understand the background and then kind of what you're up against and what's working. And I guess I was still on that mindset of we did budget for 3 ARUs last year, and for whatever reason we're still at 1, and now I'm understanding more about the HR challenges we're having, and I think we need to really resolve those because we have qualified people that are ready to go and they're not being hired. So if there's anything that I can do to help with that process without getting into personnel stuff, please let me know, because I just feel like we're on the precipice of greatness, and this is showing in one unit, just even with the limited time that it's running. So I'm just really excited and anxious to get 2 on and then even 3. So Director Ochoa, we did budget for 3, and I'm not blaming anybody, but we do have funding for that, correct? Into the next budget year, we'll have that, or what?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I'd have to get back to you on that question. What we did was move some money from the Community Services Department into the Fire Department budget at the time that we were ready to launch. So I have to investigate the history of that. It happened, I think, before my time, in the sense of, before we started launching. So I'll have to get back to you on that question, unless Chief Moya, you have additional information at this time.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I will be completely honest. I've done the budget for 2 years, and we're up at 2. So we have not been able to get 3 yet. Me and Andres have talked, and it's a lot to get 3. We're maxed out with Adam Lord already. So we hired case manager supervisor, and Adam Lord is almost at capacity with his supervision. So it's a lot of moving parts. We're trying to accomplish a lot at a very fast pace, and we're trying to assist PD and fire with trying to get some of these calls in long-term care. But right now I have officially budgeted for 2 this fiscal year.
And Madam Chair, sorry, Councilwoman Villarreal, I think what Chief Moya is saying, what Chief Mercado illustrated may be the answer to your question, but again, I'll verify the paper trail on all of that. It's the deep back bench that we have in the case management in order to run the unit, right? It's not just the case manager who's in the vehicle on the scene. It's the 2 that are back helping case manage these long-term tough issues. And the model has evolved a little and changed a little as well. So Chief Mercado, do you have additional information for that question?
Yeah, so I have not touched the budget, so I can't speak to what's contained in it or not in it. But I do know that operationally, what Chief Moya said is accurate. If we were to have the case managers to run ARU2 right now, in order to jump to ARU3, we would need additional support. For example, our training division is taxed, so they're not trained. The training division is not providing training for this. This is all done in-house. So there's some growth that would need to accompany it. That's not just the frontline providers. So I know that ARU3 will not be as easy as one additional EMS captain and 3 more case managers. It'll probably likely be, we'll just have to figure out the right way to scale that in a way that it's healthy and it's not going to be just providers.
Thank you for that clarity. I think what you're saying is more a capacity, not necessarily limited budget or funding to do what you need to do. Is that what I'm hearing?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I will be completely honest. It is one department in the big picture. So I am not only worrying about air, EMS, and MIHO, I have to worry about the structural side. I have to worry about the EMS side. I have to worry about the training side. So we also have to build from the base. So I that is something I'm going to have to push in this budget cycle is I have to build from the bottom up, and we have to stop, get more paramedics into the group. And I can't keep taking from the field paramedics to go to Andres' units because I don't have the field units to back up. So it's a lot of building from the base, making sure that we're solid at the bottom and then working our way up throughout the department as a whole. We talked so great about EMS and MIHO and the air units, but I have a whole other department that I also have to keep functioning and running that sometimes we miss. And that's something that I have to manage as the fire chief is I have wildland division and I have all other kinds of divisions. And it's not just one division I'm worrying about. I have to worry about the whole department as a whole and keep running those 911 calls 24/7. So that is something just to keep in your back of your mind that I'm trying to accomplish a lot. And it's hard to get a lot of units when I'm still trying to fix other sides of the department that wasn't quite there yet.
I hear you, Chief Moya. I understand that. I'm just wanting to make sure that we support you all in the way that's most helpful. And if you all are expecting or wanting to have budget requests in this next fiscal year, I'm definitely in support of it for the ARU unit. So that's what I'm getting at, just to let us know if there's a way or what we can do to support that. If you and actually the question I guess for Director Ochoa is are you all expecting to ask for more funding in this budget cycle?
Madam Chair, Councilman Villarreal, thank you for that question. We are working on that right now in terms of what Chief Moya is saying. What is the strongest foundation to grow ARU? We will definitely ask for funding for evaluation. As this has been a work in progress that's evolved in real time. And obviously Chief Mercado's and Captain Champlin and on the police department side have been doing a really great job of collecting data. But I think we need to have a really thorough evaluation before we grow, so that when we grow, which we will, we have to, it's working, it's great. Everybody sort of sees that and agrees that on that. We do grow sort of in the best way. And so I think evaluation, shoring up the fire department's administrative capacity, shoring up the paramedic, the stress on the paramedics in the fire department is very real, especially in the last 2 years during COVID. But making sure that the paramedics in the fire department are well taken care of, that we can bring on new people, that we can retain people. ARU is a special unit of the fire department, but it's also deeply connected with every element of the fire department. And so for the ARU to grow, that base, as Chief Moya says, really needs to be healthy and strong. So I hope I'm not trying to be vague, but I think what we're doing right now is saying, okay, what would it take to get a 3rd unit, a 4th unit? And again, to make sure that it's structured properly. There are a lot of other models too around the country of how these things are going. We found that we didn't need a police officer on the unit, which is the model we started with. Is there a world in which sometimes we might not need a paramedic? Some communities are doing that. So we need to have an evaluation that really looks at our options, what the strengths are, and not just sort of replicate what we've got now, because as the chiefs have said, it's the scaling up is complex.
Got it. Yes, that makes sense. I think that's all I have right now. Thank you for the presentation and the information, and for the team that does this incredible work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would first off just like to say, kudos to everybody. This program, it's difficult because you hear people in the community and they call in and it's like, man, there's so much going on in our city, from crime to the homeless, and there's just so many issues involved. My question would be is response time. And I think I may have missed it in your presentation. I don't know, but when there's so many moving parts to this, when the call comes in, I'll just make an example. There was an email that came through in January where a person was saying it took 166 minutes for a response to my situation. And I think we might have all heard about that or read the email. And so with all the different moving parts that are involved with this, and I know it's a work in progress. And so, my hope is that the program evolves to the point where it runs really efficiently, and it can get to these people that are in fear or whatever's happening in their situation. I don't know what was happening at the same time in the city when this call came in, and so we have to take that into consideration as well. But with the different departments and the moving parts, what's going to be done to improve that response time when there is emergencies, and obviously how do we qualify that?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, thank you for that question. I'll take a stab at it, and then maybe Chiefs Joy and Moya can give their perspective. A good response time, as many know, I think need to know, starts with our 911 call center, right? So the calls that come in there, they are triaged and dispatched out of that center. That's a county-run center. We are a partner in that. We often support that center in every way we can with light-duty staff and things like that. They have struggled to keep their staffing up, and so sometimes the response time is not on the city's end. Sometimes it's on the rec end, and I can't speak to that specific call, but that's just something for the public to keep in mind. I think that that a good response time requires that first call to be triaged effectively. After that, your question is really relevant with the ARU, in that what we are finding is that, of course, with one unit out there, one team out there, it's really a drop in the bucket. But when you look at the overall call volume of PD, for example, which has so much response time tied up with disorderly conduct calls, for example, one of the largest categories of calls, if we could get to a place where we have more units and they're going out safely to deal with these calls and provide an appropriate response to people having mental health and substance use crises in the field that are nonviolent, then we would anticipate that we would see that PD has, more capacity to respond quickly to other types of calls. But I would stand behind our call response time in Santa Fe. I think it's overall very strong and good. And I'll pass it over to Interim Chief Paul Joy to take the rest of that question.
Hi there, Madam Chair. Councilor Garcia, sure, yeah, to echo off of what Director Ochoa has already said. Yeah, so, and I'm going to ramble a little bit, but regardless of if you call 911 or you call the non-emergency number, that call gets triaged and prioritized by dispatch first. And that's where having to do a little bit of education to some folks out in the community as well, where they think automatically, well, I called 911, you guys didn't get here. Well, sure, but based on the call that you called in, it probably should have been sent to non-emergency first to also be triaged. And when people call 911 when they shouldn't call 911, that ties up the line for people who are having a legitimate emergency that they need assistance with. So regarding the call that you're referencing, We are doing our own internal review and inquiry as to kind of what happened and whether or not kind of where things went wrong on that call. But again, to reiterate what Director Ochoa said, and this isn't in any way to speak ill or anything on their RECC. They're doing a very difficult job, and they're short staffed like we all are, and they're great people over there. But yeah, we rely on them to be that first qualifier of the call. Bouncing around again a little bit with disorderly conducts. Disorderly conduct is a very broad, generalized term, and there's a lot of different type of call types and things that can happen that will be categorized as disorderly conduct. And so this is partially why on the PD side, when we put the policy together for this, the initial discussion was, okay, well, we're only going to have again, our PD policy, we're going to have ARU respond to behavioral health calls. Well, if that's all we had it categorized as, the numbers would be very limited because the people who are calling it in don't necessarily recognize it as a behavioral health call. And so that was why we wanted to categorize these calls as disorderly conduct calls, as welfare check calls, and a few others. And just to kind of bounce around with the numbers. So I did a quick poll today of our database. For 2021, we have 94,213 calls for service. Of those 94,213, roughly 10,410 were disorderly conducts, and 7,028 were welfare checks. And so this unit wouldn't respond to all of those calls, but what this unit has the ability to do, which like on the PD side, they don't have that option, is to read through the narrative, ask more information, and make that independent determination as to whether or not the call that they're seeing fits what they can do. And they also have the determination and the ultimate say-so to say, we'll go to that, but we want to make sure PD responds to that first to clear it, make an initial determination, and let us know that it's safe for us to make an approach. I don't know if I answered all your questions, I hope.
Yeah, and again, I do understand how this is a work in progress, and it does take a lot of moving parts to make it successful. And I think that's the challenge. I want to reiterate the comments by Councilor Villarreal, and in any way you guys need, whatever help we can give to continue with this project and make it a successful project. And once again, thank you guys for all your dedication and time. And so I'll go ahead and yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions from the committee? I do have a couple questions myself. First of all, I really want to thank the entire team for launching into this. I know that this was a bit of a brave new world that you all stepped into, very well thought out. As I frequently hear in public health, you don't want to guess, but at the end of the day, you make a very, very, very educated guess. And you guys made a guess, a very educated guess, well thought out, well planned, and I really appreciate it. I had a couple questions about the schedule. Monday through Friday, 8 to 6 is the standard schedule. When you are bringing on another unit, are you planning on basically increasing the number of units available at those times, or are you starting to look at expanding those hours?
Councilor Cassidy, members of the committee, I think Director Ochoa sort of mentioned this. These are some of the challenges scaling up, having those discussions. And she also mentioned that, or Chief Joy mentioned maybe that it's a drop in the bucket. So the belly of welfare checks and disorderlies during the peak, during those hours of the day is enormous. So it's not like we really need to stretch very far. We could keep on doing volume reduction during those peak hours. And the added bonus at that is that the infrastructure that we do have is available during that time. The resources that we are transporting to are open at that time. So there is some system building capacity questions around increasing hours, particularly with La Sala, the crisis triage center on Galisteo, the mobile crisis response team, And then our own internal behavioral health direction, Nicole Alt and the contractor and just supervision, general supervision. So it makes sense at this point to concentrate our efforts during a specific time of the day. And if we felt like there weren't enough calls to add a second unit during sort of 8 to 6 p.m., we'd probably modify that. But at this time, we just have 80 hours instead of 40 hours of availability during that time frame.
If I could add, Councillor Cassett, Madam Chair, that Andres reminded me of a really important element of the growth, which is the community partnerships that are required to have what I've learned to call dispositions, good dispositions for these folks, that it's one thing to find folks in the field at any given time of day. It's another to be able to transport them to a place that will get them what they need. And so even if we could wave our magic wand and staff all public safety 24/7 shifts with adequate ARU units to respond to the need, we would not have the community resources we would need to deal with what we found in the field yet. So we work very closely with our community partners at the county, at the hospitals, to really think of this response as one piece of an overall system that needs shoring up on multiple ends. So to Councillor Villarreal's question around what we would request in the new year, we might request funds to help shore up other parts of the system so that our ARU teams could have places and services to dispose people to, permanent supportive housing, other places where people can go. And we're looking at all of those elements right now.
Thank you, Director Ochoa. Andres, did you have more to add to that?
Councillor Cassett and members of the committee, really briefly, it may not be financially or logistically feasible to have ARU units 24/7, 365, multiple units. So I think in order to really scale up the services, so even when the ARU doesn't have a good place to take someone or someone's denying services, part of it is just harm reduction on our response. So the people that show up, being trauma informed, being aware of resources, understanding mental illness. So I think there's some training opportunities for all of our public. I remember during budget talk some time back, Chief Padilla was being asked about community policing efforts. And I thought, Chief Joy just mentioned 94,000 incidents last year. That's 94,000 opportunities to do community policing. We run 17,000 calls on the fire department. That's 70. So together it's about 116,000 opportunities to do community EMS, community policing. So even though ARUs will be slower to evolve, there are some training opportunities that I think we'd be wise to explore.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you both for speaking to the complexity of the issue and how it interacts with some of these other quality of life issues that we spend a lot of time discussing, both in this committee and at the governing body. I know it's all interconnected and it's a challenge to weigh, where do we really leverage everything and leverage our resources. My second question, given that answer, I understand that it might not be clear either, but I know that we are we've funded a workforce police study. And I am curious about the discussion of the interaction between the ARU and the police workforce study. Obviously, as you have all illustrated, at this moment, one ARU is a drop in the bucket compared to the number of calls that potentially an ARU could be fielding. But I'm wondering that as recommendations are going to be coming through, how these two things are going to be interacting with each other.
Councillor Cassett, I'll take that question. Thank you for that question. Yes, the police workforce study is underway. We had a draft. We've looked at the draft. Police department really dug in and found that there were some issues with the data in that was a problem. And so, good data in, good product out. We didn't have, some of those systems weren't lining up in terms of what they were seeing in call volume. So the consultant matrix is going back and looking at that, revisiting that based on our input. I have asked them to look at the ARU. Really, it's not going to be possible to integrate it fully because they're looking at pre-COVID data for 2019 before the unit started, because our 2020 data is such an anomaly because of COVID. So they are examining a data set that doesn't include all the data you saw tonight from the ARU. However, they're very interested in exploring the project. We've asked them to look at it as a sort of what if, if you analyze data, what could we meaningfully presume about the impact an ARU might have on police work needs or staffing needs. It's not going to be a one-to-one comparison just because of the different timeframes, but we hope to have that study complete going into budget, and it can inform what we ask for with the ARU as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. I do appreciate that. I know it's hard to get hard numbers there. And again, I know we've had this conversation, and sometimes there's this idea that we're trying to really, I think what we were talking about at the beginning is that there are calls that come in that there are other types of first responders that might be a better fit than police. And it also allows police to be focusing on the vast number of things that police need to be focusing on in our community, because we do understand that they're really stretched. So I really appreciate you guys trying as much as possible to see where the impacts could be and how we best serve the community with our different public safety teams. I don't believe I have any other questions for that. As everyone else has said, I think that this is a really important discussion for budget, especially that conversation of what is the kind of internal city infrastructure that we need to build to really have a solid base, solid foundation for all of these really incredible and innovative programs. And I want to thank you all for thinking about this on all these levels, and again, continuing to evaluate and to adjust this program to see how it can really serve these huge, complicated, widespread needs in our community that, quite frankly, have only gotten worse. And so I just really cannot express my gratitude enough. So thank you. And thank you for being here. And with that, I will move us to the next presentation, which I believe some of you will be staying here. Top arrests in 2021 and progress on Harrison Road, and Interim Chief Joy and Sergeant Montano, floor is yours.
All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen here and see how this works. Fingers crossed. How are we looking?
We are looking good. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. And I'll be able to send this to everyone as well, for those who don't have it. And I'm looking off to the side here. So I'm trying to be able to see you all, but also the screen here. So I'm going to refresh this. We presented this to the folks in Harrison Road, the community members, and had a very productive meeting. I think it went well. I hope it went well, and provided some feedback. I'm going to try to be pretty brief on this, and I guess sit back for questions if you guys have it. I've seen your agenda. I know you guys have a lot going on today. Sergeant Montano is here as well, so she can give more of that ground level discussion if you guys have those questions. So moving on, let's see if this works. All right. So the background on this is, so what you're seeing here in the photo, this is a photo of Harrison Road. The red outline here, this is how we do our search for data. So we're not able to search by road, all calls for service on a particular road. So what we do is we bring into a radius, and then we do our calls for service search by that radius. And so as you can see here, for 2021, 527 proactive close patrols on Harrison Road. That averages to roughly 1.5 close patrols per day, just on Harrison Road. We had at least 12 shift briefings. Again, we responded to 921 calls for service. Our highest call for service, which isn't, it's not a surprise, it's disorderly conduct. And as I said before, disorderly conduct is kind of like an umbrella term, a generalized term that can mean a lot of different types of incidents and call types within it. And we had 117 offense incidents reports that were filed. And just referencing data again from my poll today, for 2021 citywide, we had 12,263 close patrols. So year to year, close patrols, despite our staffing challenges and all the other things that we're seeing, close patrols are still our number one call for service that we have logged in. This is just, again, the top calls for service by frequency for Harrison Road. Again, close patrols are number one, followed by disorderly conducts. Again, this isn't really particularly surprising. And then suspicious persons or activity. Welfare checks, generally speaking, welfare checks are pretty high year to year, citywide. Again, because they're a generalized term. Traffic stops on there as well. These aren't everything. These are just the top ones that we were able to hammer in. And this is the first month of 2022 so far. Once again, close patrols, it's still averaging about 1.5 patrols per day. Suspicious person or activity is number 2 on this one. And on. And if you guys have any questions along the way, please, I can't see hands, so just yell at me. So the police operation efforts, enforcement efforts. So the operation formally on paper began the beginning of January. However, it was beginning of December that the bike team, Sergeant Amanda Montano and her group, the beginning of December, they went out there. It was, again, kind of familiarizing themselves with the situation, meeting with business owners, meeting with folks who live in the area to get a full assessment of what they're seeing and what the issues are, so that Sergeant Montano, this is her operation, she would kind of best know how to put the wheels in motion. One of the things that we thought was pretty cool for this operation was we were able to get one woman back to her family in Arizona, who was found on Harrison Road. And we located one individual who was wanted for warrants for drug trafficking, and he was also charged with trafficking, again, a large amount of narcotics. And on the patrol side, one of the stories, if you saw on the news or in the New Mexican last couple of weeks, regarding some of the high-profile drug arrests that we and our regional partners have made, one of those arrests was initiated off of observations made on Harrison Road. And so I can't go too far into the weeds on that, but we've been there on patrol, and also, again, as the bike team as well. For the month of January, 24 arrests in total, 1 for shoplifting, 23 were for warrants. And then you can see the citations, and 72 disorderly conduct contacts. So moving on. And if you have any questions on that, and just, again, I'm going to ramble a little bit. I'm going to stop the screen share for now. Did I come back? We good? Okay. What has been cool for us, I think, and I'm glad that we were able to kind of piggyback off of the ARU presentation as well, because I think what has been proven successful for us is the big word of collaboration. With ARU, a lot of these issues are more than a police issue. They're more than what the police can handle by themselves or accurately and successfully resolve on their own. And so with ARU, it was working with our other partners in the Community Health and Safety Department. With our Harrison Road operation, we've been fortunate to work with the new director at the shelter, Karina Lopez. She was, once she took over, Director Ochoa made it a point to get us together via Zoom. I was going to say in a room, but we weren't. It was a virtual room to have conversations and swap phone numbers and discuss issues and hammer out how this was going to play out for us. So the operation has been extended for 30 days. I know one of the community members yesterday raised concerns that 30 days isn't enough. I don't disagree with her. But basically what we're doing is every 30 days, we're reevaluating and we're seeing, again, what kind of tweaks we need to make or we can make. Sergeant Montano, and I don't want to speak for her, but was discussing trying to expand the radius of the operation to, again, include some of the other neighboring roads and streets and businesses. But again, we're evolving here. So I'll stand for questions, and Sergeant Montano is available as well.
Thank you so much, Chief Joy. Any questions from the committee? Councilwoman Villarreal?
I sure hope you all can hear me.
A little, I mean, get close to the mic and talk
I am
loud.
so close, you all. Pretty soon you're gonna see my nose hairs if I get any closer. I appreciate the presentation and even last night, and I didn't have any specific questions. I guess I was curious what we should tell community members. There's some activity happening on Jorgensen, and there are businesses that have some information and they would like to know what is the best way to get that information to you all so it's helpful for investigations on drug trafficking.
Okay.
You can email me later about that or however you want to share, but that's been coming up for some of my constituents and I don't really know where to direct them so that they feel safe.
Sure. Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal. So what I try to advocate for is for people to call dispatch when these are happening in real time. It's hard for me to gather an appropriate response or to assess for appropriate resources when I'm getting emails of things that happened after the fact. And so it's not in any way disputing or diminishing the issues that they're experiencing. And I understand that people don't necessarily want to have their name put into call for service, and they don't want to take that step to be identified. You can call in anonymously. Dispatch will ask for your information. You don't necessarily have to give it. For us on the backside, though, it is more helpful for us in working and building the case. And I can speak to that experience both as an officer and as a detective here. It's helpful for us to have the people who are watching it, are seeing it, are the victims of it, to work with us to build these cases. But again, I want to be sensitive to the folks who are seeing this and want to remain anonymous. But it is a challenge for us as well. But bouncing around again, I'm sorry. If they can call it in real time or as close to real time when they're seeing these things happen, that way we can have the data. When we're pulling up calls for service in our system, what I like to say is the data and the information that informs our action. That's what we go off of to look at heat maps and assess for, okay, we need more resources in this area around this time frame. We can give that out to our patrol officers. So I answer your question.
Yes, thank you, Chief. And I guess it's more about tips and seeing things as trends happening
Right.
in the area and who they should contact.
I'm sorry to cut you off. There is the drug tip hotline. I've got it right over here. I think I had it. 428-3737. Or if they call for the non-emergency dispatch number, they'll also refer them to the drug tip hotline. But those are monitored by our narcotics sergeant, and all of our drug tips do get investigated. Again, depending on the volume, this is another thing that I've said before, these may take a while. They may take multiple calls because the detectives may go out there and they're not seeing what the folks in the neighborhood are seeing. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. Both things can be true, that this is happening, the neighbors are seeing it. When our detectives are out there, it's hard for us to hammer down a timeline all the time. And so especially drug investigations, they take a while. But it's important that the community, again, we rely on the community to help us out and be our eyes and ears for when things are happening.
Thank you for that information. Thank you, Chief Joy, and thank you, Sergeant Montano.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one quick question, and I don't know if it's going to be a short answer, but when you respond to a call out on Harrison Road and there obviously is something that's triggered a reason to arrest somebody or take them in for services of sort. Obviously, this kind of goes around the whole what we just discussed in the alternative response units. And where are they taken, and how often are they just coming back out and in the same cycle? And I think that's a big concern from a lot of the community members. And how are we addressing that? Because a lot of times you'll probably see it's the same person and in the same cycle. And again, the reality is, how do we get these people help into a better situation, and also continue to make our community safer? And maybe just a little quick elaboration on the process. Where do they take them when they are committing crimes or are in a situation where they need assistance, and how quickly are they back in the same spot?
Sure. All right, Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, you can take a stab at this here. So, and this is another frustration that we've heard both from folks at the shelter and citywide. So as an example, let's say I'm trespassing in your property. You call police. You have video of me trespassing on your property. You took pictures of me trespassing on your property, but by the time the police got there, I'm across the street. Obviously, we know I was trespassing. You know it. You got the video to prove it. You got the photos to prove it. But criminal trespass is not a misdemeanor exception, which means the officer has to be present to witness it in real time to make an arrest for it. But what the officer can do is issue a citation for it. And so there's only a limited number of misdemeanors that qualify as misdemeanor exceptions. And I can pull that online and send it to you all as well. But if it doesn't meet the qualification of a misdemeanor exception, then the officer can still issue a citation. But that's basically the end of the interaction, and send that person on their way. If it's someone who is in need of additional services, if ARU is out, obviously they can make that call for ARU. There's other resources that they can call in with the mobile health unit. That is also a resource that is still building up to get to capacity to, I think, operate at 23/7. So the interesting thing is there's a lot of potential resources that are all working in real time to build up to the capacity to be able to serve around the clock. But as much as I would like, and I think everyone would like, and everyone already knows, it's not an overnight fix. And so we're having to work with what we can work with. But the shelter has been helpful in that with regard to the criminal aspect and the camping, their zero tolerance policy has been helpful for us as well. And the fact that they're sticking to it of if in the past, as I understand it, and there were people who were trespassed or issued a do not serve or do not return, but they were allowing them on the property to eat or receive other services, which on the PD side, well, then they're not trespassed because you're letting them on to get this, that they're either trespassed or they're not. And so with this discussion and working with the shelter, that they're kind of sticking to this plan. The people who are camping on Harrison, if they're doing so, they're not welcome in the shelter. It's either or, it's not both. And working with the bike team to keep folks from bouncing around again. What we don't want to do is criminalize homelessness, right? Similar to ARU, where we don't want to criminalize behavioral health or mental health. And so where it is, we want to make it so that the folks at the shelter are as safe as they can be while they're receiving those services, because the issue that we were experiencing and that the folks at the shelter were experiencing is they were being preyed upon as well, and targeted by folks who were in the criminal element. And so that's where, again, we really relied on the shelter to tell us these folks belong, these folks don't. These guys are a problem. These folks are here. We're trying to keep these guys safe. So again, I hope I answered your question.
I think it kind of skirted around my question in regards to what, you know, we all understand what's happening down in these areas and all around Santa Fe with homelessness. And the reality is what is the fix? You know, I sat for about 15 minutes in my office today with somebody who lives in his car, and he has a dog. And what's the solution? I mean, where do the people go just to get a warm room for the night? And you know, obviously this is a big issue, and it's very important to all of the city administratively and the governing body. Everybody was in attendance last evening, and you know, it's tough because it's really hitting the points on mental illness, homelessness, and yet we still have ordinances in our city, and we have rules that we need to abide by. And how do we create it so we're compassionate, but at the same time we have a standard that we need to abide by? And so I think that's just my comments, and I'm eager to see how this continues and how it works with the alternative response unit and with police and fire and community health and safety and all people that are involved. So I'll go ahead and yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Any other questions at this time? I do have one question. I know we've had a lot of focus on Harrison Road, understandably, given its proximity to the interfaith shelter. I have had a number of calls, discussions with some of my constituents across Cerrillos Road, especially those living in the neighborhood, you know, kind of behind some of the shopping centers on the other side of Cerrillos, and individuals that are close to Franklin Miles. And there is a general understanding, or, you know, it seems that the placement of interfaith is also impacting these neighborhoods. And you might not have the information right now. I apologize. I did not give you a heads up that I'd be interested in this data, but I would be curious to hear what you guys are seeing, as well as what the potential opportunities for how do we really look at this kind of this general radius. Sergeant Montano, you might be able to speak a little bit more about the radius that the bike patrol actually covers. But if I could hear a little bit more information on that, that you have now, and if you want to send me follow up, if you don't have things at your fingertips, that's okay too.
Good evening, Madam Chair. So right now, the operation that we're conducting, Operation Harmonious, is just in the general area of Harrison. So we're staying within the boundaries of Siler and Rafina. To Camino Carlos Rey, we do Franklin Miles, and that's just the general area in Clark Road. So those are the general areas. Now I realize that, you know, now that people are on Harrison, they're starting to push out to these other areas. And that's kind of phase 2 of this operation will be, you know, dealing with the encampments that are getting pushed to all these other areas. If that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Sergeant Montano. That actually really does. Clark Road is very much the neighborhood that I am speaking of, that that I do get a lot of complaints about there being homeless individuals. There's specifically like some type of alleyway. It's not for cars, though. It might be some type of flood water control area. I'm sure I'm not using the correct terminology that Director McDonald would want me to, but I know that there is a lot of people will say that there will be encampments there. And then, as you mentioned, Franklin Miles. So I'm happy to hear that you guys are expanding that area and seeing some of the other neighborhoods that are impacted, and understand that it will be probably a moving target, especially as there is this focus on Harrison. And as you mentioned, how we move things out and how that also integrates with some of the other potential responses that I know, you know, we're looking at with community health and safety, with the mobile hygiene unit, ARUs, et cetera. So thank you. I do appreciate that. That was a long-winded way of saying, yes, you answered my question. Thank you very much. I don't believe I have any other questions. Anything else from any member of the committee? If not, thank you both so much for being here, and we will move on to items pulled from consent. So the first is item B. And this is a resolution adopting next steps for the reuse and redevelopment of the Midtown property, including applying for land use rezoning, general plan amendment, and a master plan, adopting a community development plan, issuing certain requests for proposals, conducting certain studies and assessments, and seeking the acquisition of land located within or adjacent to the Midtown site. And Rich Brown, the Director of Community and Economic Development, is here to present and to answer questions. Councilor Garcia, I do believe you pulled this, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rich, for being with us tonight.
Sorry, I'm orange right now.
Oh, no worries. Good to see you, Rich. I do got a couple questions, and hopefully they'll be easy to answer. So within the resolution, there's looks like there's 9 action items. And so I'm more so interested in action item 1 and 2. I know that we're currently wrapping up the community engagement process that we've been going through for a couple months now, which is to help us kind of really determine what the future of the Midtown property should look like, at least from the community's perspective. And so I guess with that being said, can you help me understand why we would take steps 1 and 2, given we haven't had that information? And I guess in particular, well, let me ask that, and then I got another follow-up to that.
Okay. Madam Chair, and good evening to everyone, and Councilor Garcia. Daniel Hernandez, our project manager, is on here, and I'm going to have him speak to that question as he's been driving the community development as it aligns together with infrastructure and land development. So I'm going to have Daniel sort of answer that question as where we are post the analysis, then more information that's coming down the pike. Daniel, if you could answer that one.
Sure. Well, the first item is the rezoning and creating a master plan and any other ordinance amendments that we may want to make to the existing link overlay. So one, we are, they're through the public engagement process over the past year and since 2018. We are just tracking things that deviate from those original Midtown planning guidelines that were passed through a resolution, whether there's any deviations in hopes, aspirations, vision, goals for the site, and there haven't been. So all of that was really confirmed during the public engagement process, which we're just kind of keeping track of. It's all sort of live and iterative. Also, these resolutions were, put forward also at various meetings with the Midtown engagement partners, so they're aware of these different actions, and we wanted to test whether there was going to be any upset in the process and whether they heard anything different than what is already in motion. So this sets the groundwork for actually implementing the land uses that everyone has continually said that they want to see at Midtown: higher education, film and arts and culture, affordable housing. And so this just allows those land uses to happen at Midtown. So again, we wanted to wait till we finished with the public engagement, and if there was anything that was deviated from or is already in the link overlay, in the 2018 planning guidelines, and things that we heard over the course of the summer and fall, then we would amend. But we didn't hear any deviation, so we feel comfortable moving forward with that. Also, we will be going through the additional public engagement in the spring and summer. We'll go through the regulatory process that's required by the planning land use office, but we'll also have additional opportunities to re-engage as we begin sort of vetting the land plan itself. The community development plan is the same way. All this is saying right now is that we are waiting for the public engagement report to be completed, which is at the end of March. Then we'll begin writing the community development plan after that, and we will continue to engage the Midtown engagement partners in that process as well to help us vet again with communities around Santa Fe. So all of this stuff is just letting the public and the governing body know that we're moving forward with these things, and we wanted to make sure that that was just made public. Yeah, so there's still more ahead as far as public engagement goes. But again, that indicates to the public that we want these things to occur and commit to them being completed.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. I appreciate that. And I guess let's focus back on number one, the rezoning and amending the master plan, et cetera. Because this resolution is, the governing body then is giving authority to the city manager. Does that mean the city manager can rezone at will? Or is all of these approvals got to come back before the governing body?
Thanks for that very good question. Allow me to be clear about that. There is a very regulated process for land use approvals. And so there's public notifications that have to happen, presentations that have to happen, and go to the planning commission. So we'll be working with land use staff, and then it goes to the governing body. So there's a series of approval routes that we still have to go through.
Okay, great. Thank you for helping to clarify that. My last question is more so around the FIR. The FIR, I don't see any costs associated with it. It's a 2-page document. There's no cost. There's usually a spreadsheet that covers costs. So I don't.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Counselor.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I don't know if it's just was not part of the packet, if it wasn't created, but I pulled it up and it's a 2-page document. Usually, the second or third page has that spreadsheet that lists out the costs, where it's impacting which departments, et cetera. And I'm seeing nothing, that kind of sheet missing. So I don't know if it just wasn't included or just to get some clarification on it, because I'm assuming there is going to be costs on the city's behalf with each of these 9 items. And I guess my follow-up to that is, could we break it out item by item? It's going to cost us to work on the rezoning. It's going to cost us to develop this community development plan. It's going to cost us this much to work on the FIR. I mean, not the FIR, the RFPs for each of the consecutive listed items. I think that's what I would like to see kind of drawn out. I don't know if we can get into that micro level, but it would be fantastic if we could.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I can answer your first question. I don't know where the actual calculation page is. It should be there. So I need to get that to you. I know that Ms. McCoy and Ms. McSherry has signed it, but there should be another page that outlines the fiscal year by fiscal year. So I'm just noticing it's not in here. So I will get that to everyone. And as it relates to your line by line cost, it's possible to do. And I know that Daniel and the team are working through a sequence, the critical path timeline. So it may be something that we could separate out by the critical path timeline in these 9 items. It might get into the micro, but it's something we can definitely explore as we get to the critical path timeline that we all have been working on. So it is something to definitely break down as something we can do.
Okay, great. Thank you for at least entertaining the request, because I think it's important for us to, and more so the public, to understand what this process is costing us as we go step by step by step. With that, no other questions, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rich and Daniel, for the information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Councilwoman Villarreal. Oh, your sound is gone.
Oh
no. Do you want to try your iPad and log out and log back in? Oh, wait, you're back. No, you're there. There you are. Great. Just mute and unmute yourself until it works. Go ahead.
I'd rather be orange rich than I
don't know what's happening with my lights.
I will try to ask these questions and hopefully you can hear them. I just had a question about the development plan and who will oversee the development of the community development plan, and how does it tie to the rest of the components of the process?
Madam Chair, Councilor Vera, I think you said who will be leading the development plan, the community development plan in this process. And then secondly, I didn't really hear, I think it was a timeline you said?
And how it ties into the other.
Oh, hi, ties in. Madam Chair, Council Villarreal, I'm going to ask Daniel to answer that question because in one of our progress reports, we show kind of we showed a timeline and we showed a path forward. So Daniel, maybe you can verbally discuss how that all works.
Yeah, there is a slide in the previous presentation, but and I can send it to the committee if you'd like. So we are the public engagement report is due at the end of March. During the month of March, we will begin presenting elements of the land development plan, so that at the end of March, both of these efforts, the public engagement report and the land development plan, are pretty much at the point of being able to go on a new trajectory of public engagement through the spring and summer as we go through the approvals process. They'll iterate between the two of them. And, oh, there it is. Yep. Thanks, Rich. And so they're synced up now. So they'll be able to inform each other. And another sort of, and to reiterate this too, the land development plan, if you can think of it as a physical, a plan that dictates the physical development of the site, what gets built on it, the things you can touch. The community development plan mostly focuses on the goals. So if we're building housing, how much of it is affordable? If we're having open space, what is it programmed to do? So it's more about the social and cultural fabric of the place that versus the physical development of the place. So again, they're iterative because a lot of the community development plan will talk about green and sustainable development, and that will clearly impact the land development plan as well. And so those will be going back and forth throughout the course of the spring and summer.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I guess I'm curious who leads the development of that plan? Is it DPAC? Are they going to be their contract going to be extended? And how will the Midtown engagement partners still be part of the process?
So I'm working very closely with Alexandra Ladd, the Director of Affordable Housing, on the Community Development Plan, and she and Lee Logstrom attend all, and Liz Camacho attend all of the Midtown Engagement Partners / DPAC meetings. They have been throughout the course of summer and into the fall. And there's discussions right now underway, and we'll continue them through the end of March when DPAC's contract ends, about the future role that the Midtown Engagement Partners will have with us, particularly as the Community Development Plan is created and then unfolds, and we will need their help and partnership in engaging the communities as it gets developed. They'll be doing that stuff also. They'll be doing that engagement also with their public engagement report in March. They're having a few Midtown Voices workshops. And that document will also be, the key element of informing the community development plan itself. So we'll need their partnership for a while.
And to add to that, Madam Chair, Council Villarreal, I'm also looking for additional funding so that we can keep the engagement with the MAPs together as we go through the entire land development process as the DPAC contract closes down. So it's a concurrent process that we're going through right now.
Great. And I hope that if you do need funds related to continuing DPAC's contract or the community grants to be able to continue that process so that these partners are part of the community development plan, I would support any budget requests for that. So I'm just letting you know that that's something that's important to me, to my colleagues as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I need some lights too, if that's okay. No.
I need a new laptop, I guess.
I do.
The other question I had was around expertise and who will be advising us for the financial models that we're considering. The Metropolitan Redevelopment Act and the TID I'm just curious if we have people that understand how to apply those in a New Mexico context.
Madam Chair, Council Villarreal, it's a couple, thank you for that question. It's, I'm going to ask Ms. Salazar and Mr. Hernandez to speak to that. Right now, our contractor at Strategic Economics is working through the fundamentals of the MRA TIF idea and working internally with our staff. And Ms. Salazar has engaged our council, other outside council, and we've been working with our Albuquerque partners to make sure that we do it the right way, because they've done a lot of it in Albuquerque. So one of our partners in Albuquerque has been engaged with us. So maybe Ms. Salazar or Mr. Hernandez can add some further color to it. Andre?
Rich, Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I guess I'll start off the answer, but strategic economics is basically guiding the modeling. We have done a lot of deep digging into what New Mexico statutory framework exists. That means that in our office, there are 3 of us working on it, along with, we meet with finance members, Brad Flush, and also externally, we have our bond council that we've been meeting with to discuss bonding functions versus TID functions. We've also met with Laird Grazier, thankfully, for talking about, he's an economist, so talking about some of the TID functions. We also have been meeting with Karen Iverson. So we've been doing a deep dive into what Albuquerque had done. They have different reasons for creating MRAs than the city does. So we've learned a lot. We've also been in contact with the economic development group at the state, talking to them about LEDA functioning along with MRAs. So it's basically a research project that we're fueling a lot of that information or feeding it to Dina and her team. And they are going to be creating the modeling. We're probably going to be discussing the legal framework and the governance structure that might come along with that.
Just a quick update or follow up. Dina will be, the strategic economics team has been showing us the preliminary model. They will be presenting to the finance committee, I believe in March. I can pull up that calendar, but I believe it's March. So they'll do a synopsis of that model, as well as the pros and cons of an MRA and a metropolitan redevelopment area in a tax increment development district. And Dina I was working with her briefly in Las Cruces on their TID stuff too. So she's getting much more familiar with the overlays here in New Mexico.
Excellent. That's what I wanted to hear, because TIDs and MRAs function differently in other states, and New Mexico has different contexts. So I'm glad you said you're looking at the statute.
Councilwoman, are you asking? Were you?
I'm
okay, there you are. Okay.
Have any other
I saw your mouth moving and no noise for a second, so I got a little nervous.
Thanks for checking on me. I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Any other questions from the committee? And if not, can I get a motion?
Motion to approve.
There we go. I got the second there. We got a motion from Councilor Chavez, second from Councilwoman Villarreal. Can I please get a roll call vote?
Yes, ma'am. Councilor Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Councilor Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Cassette.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Daniel, Andre, and Rich for being here. Good to see you all. Moving on to item C. This is a resolution establishing additional legislative funding priorities based on the potential availability of additional funding during the 2022 legislative session. Rich Brown is going to stay with us, and it looks like Director Wheeler is here as well. And if I can ask all members of the committee to refresh your PrimeGov, because there are 2 Amendments, there should be an amendment from Counselor Lindell and an amendment from Counselor Rivera that we will be considering based on our new rules this evening as well. Counselor Garcia, you pulled this item. The floor is yours.
Sure. I'll ask my question, then I'll refresh just because I hadn't seen those amendments. Let's see. The first question I got is, Regina, can you help me understand how we arrived at these 9 items, given that we have a completely different list that we've been working off for our legislative priorities? And I think maybe one of these items was on that list. So if you can help me understand where these 9 items came from.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, the 9 items came from a couple places. There are some items on here that were originally on our capital outlay, which were our priority funding options. These are also items that we've been considering internally from ARPA funding standpoint. And so we originally had put together this resolution to push it through, hopefully at the legislature, to enhance our secondary funding opportunities with state ARPA funding. So these are community development related, they're capital related, they're program related, they're economic development related. And so they are items that qualify under the Treasury guidelines for ARPA, but they may come, the funding from the state may come from all different places, but that's how they originally came up there. So when you look at some of the first 2 or 3, they are actually part of our original capital outlay, and we're just asking for additional funding so that hopefully we'll accelerate some of the work that we need to do for the capital projects.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess a follow-up to that is, how did we arrive at the requests for funding? I mean, so some of them got, I mean, these are some big amounts, $50 million for a couple of them. So, I mean, how can we justify asking for that much? I mean, I didn't see, maybe I missed it, and I didn't see in the packet kind of background info on what these items entail. It would be great to kind of fully understand if we're asking for, for example, $50 million for supportive permanent and workforce housing development. I mean, that's very broad. I mean, what are we going to do with $50 million for that? I mean, are we going to, we heard last night during the Harrison Road conversation, look at developing, maybe a small house, tiny house community for transitional housing for our homeless community. And could this $50 million be used for that? I mean, I don't know, because I don't know what this request entails. And I think from a legislator's perspective, I think we should come to them with kind of that background info. Okay, we're asking for 50 million, and this is what we're hoping to accomplish with this 50 million, and have that kind of framework and plan set out. So I don't know if it's there. Did I miss that? And if I did, maybe now that I refreshed, maybe it'll pop up. If you can help clarify for that, Rich.
Madam Chair and Councilor Garcia, thank you for the question. These are items, I'll start backwards. The state is eligible for $1.1 billion in ARPA funding. $1.1 billion. That's almost 1,000x what we're getting. And so what we were trying to do, and the time was of the essence, is that we were creating, these categories have been discussed over a couple of months as we talked about ARPA funding for the city. What we're trying to do is get a sort of max number out there so that at least if we got to half of that, we still would be able to get some additional supplemental funding for some of the things we do. Honestly, we do not have an itemized list that says for $50 million, you're going to get these 10 items. But to your point, that's a great idea, that this could include, because it's supportive housing, tiny homes in our community, buying hotels for supportive housing, looking at other property acquisitions for affordable housing. So these all fit into that broad category. But because we have maybe 2.5 weeks left to get this sort of concept out there, it's on a bigger macro level for discussion to get through to this legislature and to the council too. I'm sorry, I want to add, Councilor Villarreal asked to see if I could create a little overview packet to explain sort of what some of those are, and I've been working on it. It's not done yet, but I'm trying to get something to you guys as a PDF so you have some guidance. Some of these have been discussed in previous meetings, but some of them are new, and so I want to get some overview for you so you have that as a guide.
Great. That's great to hear, Rich. I appreciate that. It'd be helpful for just to understand why we're requesting the money, what we're planning on spending the money on, and kind of have a little more background info. You know, as I mentioned, these are some pretty big numbers. My thought is, you know, given we're asking for, you know, some of these bigger projects, and we've got the potential for the service center at Midtown campus that was on our prior list. Why is that not on here? I think that was, if I recall, there was $25 million requested for that, and I think that's something we should add to this list. If we're adding you know, $20 million for Garson, that you know, we have the potential to sell. I think that's very questionable to me. But I mean, if we're looking for investing in our city's infrastructure in that sense, why not ask for money for a new city service center?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's a really good question. And what I've learned in this first pass of trying to get this funding out here, that currently the governor's office was not interested in any funding ideas to any city if it had to build their own government offices. It had to be something that provided economic impact or had a community development impact. And so a government center was not necessarily something that they originally, when it came to this ARPA funding, that they were planning to do, because it was originally about ARPA, and ARPA wasn't really eligible as a government building. It was eligible if you were creating jobs and infrastructure for a industry cluster or tourism, et cetera, et cetera. So keeping in mind that the state of New Mexico right now probably has 4 different funding buckets that they can choose from. So we're not necessarily pointing this now to ARPA. We're just asking, can you consider those buckets for the city of Santa Fe? There are additional general fund, oil and gas reserves in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, ARPA funding, and also the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So they could choose from anything they want. But right now, this resolution was being passed through to make it through the ARPA sieve. But it's possible that they could say, oh, for supplemental funding, let's try this path from that standpoint. So the Infrastructure and Jobs Act could be where we could look at the community and the city center as a way to say, we're building a smarter city, and this is one of the ideas we'd like to put forward.
Okay, that helps. You know, I think with especially with ARP funds, I wasn't aware that we couldn't use it for you know, governmental building, even updating, so to speak. I think that there could be that argument that it currently is governmental buildings. We're updating it to make a new service center, which is going to have an economic impact in the surrounding communities. I mean, the argument could be made. We could actually look at that in that sense. You know, I think if we're going to be utilizing this for future lists for resources, I think we should add it there. And maybe let's continue to have the conversation offline if I'm grasping at straws, or if there could be a logical argument made. But I think I look forward to getting the updated information, Rich, on all of these lists, because I do want to learn more before I can support this. I know some are pretty self-explanatory, you know, Midtown, the guaranteed income program, but when we get into the supportive permanent workforce housing, you know, childcare services, what does that mean? Tourism, 5 million for tourism, what does that ultimately mean? I think I want to have a clear plan when we go asking for, you know, millions of dollars in that sense. But I appreciate the work that's going into this, and you never know, we might get lucky and get one of these 9 items met. We can all hope, and hopefully one of them will come true for us. With that, no other questions, Madam Chair. Thank you, Rich.
Madam Chair and Councilor Garcia, can I ask one thing, a big favor, that we are in a time crunch here with this request, and I understand that you want to get some data, and I'm working through the capacity I have. I do have something that I'm working on, I'd like to get to you guys. but I'm looking for your support. I want to ask that question. I am looking for your support. And I know that we'd like to get it to the legislature as soon as possible. And I'm going to try to get this to you. I could share my screen. I can show you kind of what I'm working on, but I do want to get you guys a PDF of, I'm trying to pull pieces together because we've put those numbers together, but they're not in a micro list that you can work through. But using your question, why is it requested and what are you going to spend the money on, is what I might use as the format to get it back out to you.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, the only reason I asked, Rich, is because I was having a conversation earlier today, and I'll go back to supportive permanent and workforce housing development, and having the conversation regarding, working with local entities like HomeWise, where they can help with down payment assistance, and in particular, down payment assistance for, they're right now looking at teachers. And I was having the conversation, how can we expand that to first responders, police, fire, our medical field? How can we work to provide these opportunities for folks to stay within our community, folks that are providing critical services to our community? And that's the type of language I think that would be most beneficial if we are going to our legislators to seek $50 million to explain to them, look, this is how we're going to use the money. It's very helpful. Because, as you ask Mr. Duran, sometimes he only has 2 minutes with these legislators and they want to know what they're going to be spending their money on. But if we don't have that answer, we're going to say thanks, but no thanks. And I don't want them to quickly say no thanks. I want them to say, oh, great idea. Let's continue this conversation and figure out how we can make this happen. And so I do support this. I just, like I said, I want to make sure that as we're moving forward, we're doing so in a diligent manner. So, but thank you, Rich, for sharing that you're continuing to work on providing the additional information.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Alex, can you let Councilwoman Villarreal in? I think that she's having technical issues, and so she's in the attendees room. And Rich, while we're waiting, I will say that regardless, this did pass finance, so it will move to governing body regardless of what happens here tonight, just dependent on whether it winds up on discussion or consent, but it has passed one committee. So you do still have some time to get us all the information before that final vote, and that final vote will still be next Wednesday.
And I want to add, Madam Chair, that I have Ms. Director Wheeler here. She can answer any questions about any of the capital outlay items. I'm more on the community development and programmatic side and Midtown. So if with Councilor Villarreal comes back, maybe that's a question that she has.
Perfect. And Alex, are you there? Does anybody have his contact information? I have stepped away from the screen.
Loretta, do you have access to let anyone?
Yes, I will get a hold of Alex.
Perfect, thank you. Does anybody else have questions while we are waiting for Councilwoman Villarreal? Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank Councilor Michael Garcia for his comments and really asking some of these questions, because, with so much funding that is possible, we have a really great opportunity to roll things out to our community that make a difference, make Santa Fe better, and really listen to our constituents and the people who live here in regards to what they want and what they need. And so I just, again, I appreciate all the comments on this, and especially the questions from Councilor Garcia. And I'll continue to listen, and thank you. Go ahead and yield.
Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Oh,
Madam Chair, if I could add something. I don't know if everyone has refreshed their Prime Gov, but Councilor Lindell put an amendment in to put $8 million in funding for district-created ideas that could come from each of you as district council leaders. So that's another area to Councilor Lee Garcia's comment about how do we get it down to the ground. You are ear to the ground in your district. So we also have added that as a supplemental item that we'll put into this the resolution moving forward.
thank you, Rich. And yes, we'll be discussing those amendments shortly. Councilwoman Villarreal. No problem. Thanks for mentioning it. Good comment.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Jeez, all right. My iPad is I think it's working. Anyway, I'm here. So I just wanted to bring up some questions. Part of the questions I had were similar to Councilor Garcia in finance, and it was just really getting those details and understanding, because a lot of them we've seen. Well, I would say the guaranteed income, we know what that is, early childhood care services. I think what I just want to understand are these pieces. So maybe when you put together that information sheet, that it can include this. For the airport expansion, we haven't spent past legislative appropriations, and we requested, what did we request in this legislative session? 6 million, or is it 6 million?
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that if we're requesting another 30 million, to how that gets operationalized, considering we have past appropriations we have to spend, and then we have this current request, and then what that looks like in terms of the project management.
Thank you so much for that question. It's actually a really incredibly good time to be getting additional $30 million. As you know, we are in construction at the airport with a $21.5 million construction project. The designer of record for the airport is on staff basically right now with this project, and they are ready to start immediately on phase 2, which is an additional expansion of space of the airport that will actually give us our final configuration of our baggage claim and a new restaurant. And so they're poised and ready. They've actually sort of master planned it and conceptually planned it, and they're ready to go to get that to the finish line. And then conceivably we could roll right from this phase 1 construction right into phase 2 construction. That piece is 20 million. And then we all really want to have that connection from the airport to 599. And that road has been designed. I think we need a good update on that and make sure it's everything we want it to be. But we know, and that's a $10 million road. It was about $6 million about 4 years ago. So that we're ready to take that money and roll it right into the airport and produce results. There was a little delay of spending some of the first money, because in 2019 we got 1.5 million for the parking lot, and then the next year in 2020 we got an additional 10.5 million for a new terminal, and so that changed our whole parking lot project. We actually had to throw away the design and have a new parking lot design for the new terminal. We didn't really realize we were going to get funded for that. But now I actually just signed a pay request for about $500,000 against the 1.5 million. So that money's going to start going and be spent really fast since we're under construction already. So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you, Director Wheeler, for those details. That was helpful. Yeah, I just want to make sure we're ready to go with that. Did you say a new road would be constructed off 599, not the current access
That's
point?
right. That's correct. It would be from that Jaguar Drive overpass that was built recently. That'd be such a great and a little road right to the airport.
Thank you for the clarity. So the other item was the food innovation, cannabis and bioscience manufacturing hub. That was the first I'd heard about this. And what I was curious about is, how did this location get selected? And what does that look like for a hub center? Does the city run it?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I think, is that your question? Okay, so how it came about, we have been, of course, tracking all of our industry growth sectors, and food innovation is one of them. And we have we have two actually, food companies, but one in particular that is expanding in a way where the city of Boulder is trying to lure them to come to their city to expand there. And they're getting into all different types of e-commerce, freeze-dried foods, et cetera. And for the past year, I think and a half, I have been looking for different pieces and parcels of city land to create a manufacturing space for this food company to expand. I've lost one. One is now in Los Lunas, and I have one more left. And to the point, we are now at a place where the location over off of 599 is a leased piece of land from the state that is to be used for economic development, and it has not been developed. And so this is my last option of city land that I have that could be used. And there's enough acreage there to build this food hub. Think of it as a manufacturing building for people to manufacture their products. One would be a very large company or expanding company to grow. The bioscience side would be another phase of this project because we have the bioscience companies in incubation at the incubation center, but we want to get the food company up and running so that we are not in a hard competition with Boulder, Colorado to take this growth company that's been here for the last 20 years and leave because we couldn't find a space for them. So over the last year and a half, I've been looking for a space to go, and we just have not been able to find an accurate space for this expansion project. And now we've found one, and now LEAD is up, Infrastructure and Jobs Act's up, the state has lots of money, we have some ARPA funding, and we're trying to leverage some of those so that we can accelerate this idea so that we can bring those in, jobs and growth for food innovation, so that we can spur more entrepreneurship from that standpoint.
And so would the city run the hub, and then we would have tenants of these businesses you're referring to?
Yes, they would lease out space. It'd probably be one large business and a couple of small businesses, but right now there are 2 other entities in the city that are working on food commissary businesses, so they wouldn't necessarily be there, but right now it would be a manufacturing building. We just call it hub because there's enough space. There's 40 acres, so you could build one building and then build another building, and it just would be a hub for that industry sector. So we call it a manufacturing hub from that standpoint. It happens a lot in other cities of our size. They use the airport land for these types of things, where it's easy to do distribution and shipping, et cetera, and it's easy on and off. But we're close to the airport, but this is some land that has a 50-year lease from the state, and they've particularly asked us in the terms to make sure it's for economic development purposes.
Okay, and then the piece about cannabis, the amendment from Councilor Rivera was to take that out. So does that mean, what the land that you're talking about is actually right next to El Camino Real Elementary. So I don't know if that's a conflict related to the cannabis use. And so do you know more about, or does staff know more about that amendment?
So, Manager Blair just raised his hand, but and Mr. Guillen did also. I can speak to it, but I'll have Manager Blair start out first.
Thank you, Chairwoman Cassett, Councilor Villarreal. Thank you for the question. I'm excited to see that Director Brown is no longer orange.
Yes.
I spoke with Councilor Rivera today, and I think to the councilor's point, he recognizes that cannabis is something that's happening. It's going to be an economic driver for Santa Fe. I think to his point, it just was unclear at this point where the location would be. And to your point as well, I don't know that work's been done in accordance with the ordinance that you all passed around how far do these facilities have to be from school districts or from daycare centers. And so sort of the right balance was to say, we still support the development of this project. We need to determine where, but we wanted to remove any sort of sense that the location had been determined.
Correct. And then also to add to that, we also are finding out over the last couple of days since these meetings is that the ROI to put this space in, and it was in a phase spot project, it wouldn't be sort of immediate in the next year, would be further out, that the ROI on it is a little higher than we would imagine to bring it in, get it started, invest in it, et cetera. So it is something where both it's closer to a school and two that we'd have to figure out, not that we're in the business of making money, but how do we make it so that it is lucrative for our economy.
So with the amendment, I don't know if Jesse was going to elaborate on that. Was the reasoning that because of that potential conflict, is that why Councilor Rivera made that adjustment to the name?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I misunderstood what Councilor Rivera wanted from his amendment, and I don't believe that the amendment in PrimeGov says that anymore. I replaced it. So maybe you need to refresh your screen. The one there that is there now after the quotation marks, after, well, I don't remember what's in the quotation marks. Let me look quickly.
Oh, it's at South Meadows Crossing.
Yeah, so it's essentially deleting the section, which is just mentioning South Meadows Crossing. So After it says manufacturing hub center, we're striking the rest of the sentence.
Okay, so, and the reasoning for striking that is because it wasn't necessarily at that location?
Councilwoman Villarreal, I'm not sure that the sponsor's not here to speak to the intent, so I don't know if we can really discuss the intent of what that is or ask the staff to weigh in on what they think Councilor Rivera was speaking, but as opposed to just strictly what it does in terms of the resolution.
Okay. I don't know how to vote on that. I mean, I understood his concern about it, but it, yeah. All right, well, I'll move on to the next piece. I wanted to know in your description, or maybe you have it now, is when we talk about the supportive permanent and workforce housing development, what specifically are we listing under that item? And is it specifically for funding our Affordable Housing Trust Fund?
Madam Chair, Council Villarreal, it's a mixture of things. And again, these are concepts we're trying to get to Councilor Garcia's point. We're looking at a soundbite, like here is what it's for. This is based on this. So when you think about that large amount of money, think of all those things. And Councilor Garcia came up with the great idea of making tiny homes. We're also thinking, how do we could purchase motels that are going out of business to use for supportive housing. I got an email from my director of tourism to say, why don't we look for housing for essential workers? Because they can afford to live here and they work here. So it could be broken down in many different ways. We're just saying, here's the high water mark of what we'd like to invest in. And we will sort of iterate what we will decide what it comes through. Part of it probably will go to the Housing Trust Fund. Part of it will go to affordable housing. Part of it will go to workforce housing. But that's kind of the greater idea around what the funding idea is about. And because there's so much money that's being looked at, we just said, let's go with a higher number so that at least we know that even if we try for 3 projects, that's a big milestone for the city of Santa Fe.
Thank you. And does this also include funding for an innovation district?
It does not. It's no funding for an innovation district. Think of the food hub as an innovation district, but it is not for an innovation district.
Okay. Thank you. And then the early childhood services, we've been talking about this. And I guess I wanted to know more about what that would entail and if this funding is more of a pass-through to provide nonprofit and private sector partners.
Madam Chair, Council Vera, that's a really good question. I think you could look at it into 3 buckets. One bucket is pass-through to our childcare provider organizations and ecosystem to provide childcare. We have a lot of at-home care, so there's some education resources need, even if we could build a resource hub for home care providers to understand what the resources out there. Additionally, we also see that there is a dearth of childcare workers, so we'd like to partner with an SFCC to do some childcare work so that we can get some workforce and job training together. And then additionally, there is the entrepreneurship of childcare. So how can we spur home child care or mid-level child care? So consider that in a 3-bucket aspect as relates to child care services and workforce development.
Thank you, Director Brown. And then moving on to the Garson Film Studios. So in the previous resolution, it talks about creating an RFP for that that area and that initiative. And so we're asking for 20 million to pay for improvements for that facility so that it's more marketable, or
okay. Increases our land value and our building value. So we want to, it's sort of like when you buy a home and you want to fix up the bathroom or, put some landscaping in the front yard. That's just kind of what this would be used for. We have a studio that has as I said earlier, has a parking lot that looks like a canyon, a couple of canyons. And so we need to improve that lot because film productions would like to bring their trucks in, but it's very difficult to park. And we want to rent that space, right? And so we want to improve the area. Also, maybe acquiring adjacent land if we have to, so that the film studio RFP is much more attractive to a film studio developer who would want to pay top dollars.
Okay, and the 5 million for the small business local tourism recovery. There wasn't any details with that. Is there anything you want to share now, or we should wait to the summary?
Well, we've been talking about it in a lot of ways, and it's also kind of something that's coming up with ARPA, and it's really more about, as everyone knows, the tourism industry suffered through this pandemic, and it's just coming out. Some sectors are doing great, and some sectors are not. We have again, a dearth of workers in restaurants. We have restaurants that are trying to figure out how do they sustain themselves. We have a need for commissaries so that these food trucks can come survive because they've lost their leases in places where they might have done it before. So that all ties into the tourism piece. And Mr. Randall's not here tonight, but that's kind of what we're looking at, is all the different elements of the tourism industry. We'd use this money from that standpoint. Essential workers, restaurants, the food truck industry, commissary, food, commercial kitchens, et cetera, to supplement that. So that's kind of what it's designed as.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question about the COVID, we talked about the COVID testing, vaccination, PPE. And so is that to purchase items so that we actually then administer those items, whether that's home tests, et cetera, to the general public?
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, good question. Yeah, think of that funding as we are not aware, or we're not certain that this pandemic has ended. So there could be another spike, right? So this funding allows us to be prepared, way more prepared, either through outreach, through materials, et cetera, that we could use for our own city to be prepared, because what we don't want is another round of spikes. And so this number, well, it seems like a very large amount of money. We're a city of 80,000. And so we're saying that it's, again, a couple buckets of items that could be materials, could be outreach, it could be working with our local community organizations to get the word out, radio spots, advertising, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. And last question on that amendment from Councilor Lindell. We all go, yay, money for our districts. However, I'm trying to figure out how that integrates with what we already have set for, capital improvements and other projects. And does this mean new project ideas will come about, and how do we actually make that happen? I'm just trying to figure out the capacity issue and prioritization. And we've never actually had funding like this before in districts, which would be nice. I'm just trying to figure out I don't know if Jesse has any idea about well, again, it's about the intention of the resolution or the amendment. So I'm not quite sure if anyone can speak to that, but I'd like to know how that would work for you all, because does that mean then we get to tell you all, hey, we want to do this project. Community members like the idea, but you all have this list and kind of timeline of things that you're working on. So I'm confused about how that would work, realistically, as much as I like the idea.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, that's a good question. And I wish that Councilor Lindell was here to sort of articulate it further, but I think her idea around it, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think her idea around it was that, again, each of you have your ear to the ground for your community. You get lots of input from your constituents. And so if you think about our ARPA presentation in the different buckets that we had discussed, those kind of ideas could come from you to say, can you put this in the workforce bucket? Could you put this in the childcare bucket? Can you put this in the economic development bucket? I think that's kind of where she's saying that that you as a district council leader may say, hey, if I can go out to my neighborhoods and say, I have this much to spend and I'd like to spend it in these buckets, maybe you have an idea that we can pitch. And then it would be funded through the whole eligibility and procurement process, but it'd be something that you might bring into the city and say, hey, can you add this to this bucket or that bucket?
Yeah, I'm still wondering because there's plenty of great ideas in this community and everybody has an idea. And so I'm just trying to figure out how we administer that, how we prioritize it. Yeah, so I'm just putting a flag on that because I'd like to know more about how that will work. And then what that does to your time frame of priorities you're working on, and capacity and project management, all the stuff that I brought up in finance. So I don't know if that concerns you, but it concerns me.
Madam Chair, Council, Muriel, I think you're right, but keep in mind that this, if we're talking about this funding coming through the ARPA the timeframe or ARPA funding bucket, ARPA has a 2 to 4 year timeframe to get into action. So keep in mind that we're not saying, if this is an ARPA funding aspect, that tomorrow this has to go into place. It could be something that happens in the 4th quarter of this year, after we've already sort of built the capacity to lay out all the things that we're trying to do in our bigger picture for ARPA. But we have a couple of years to implement programs that could happen.
Yes, thanks for that reminder. That puts my mind at ease. Because could you imagine 8 of us going, we want this project, we want this project, we want this project, we like this one. So I'm just wanting to make sure we have information about that, how that would look. I mean, I'm not opposed to the idea. I actually like it. So I'll yield the floor. I think I've asked enough questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilor Chavez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really just have a few comments. I want to thank my colleagues for bringing up the questions they did. I think it allowed Rich to provide some important details. And Rich, just thank you for jumping in and trying to get on that summary to provide us details. I do think it's important, but I did just want to comment on what I think is really important here, which is I don't think that we can limit ourselves in regards for requesting funds or when it comes to funding. When I look at this list, I see the benefits in it all, even without details. I see how our community could benefit. I think that's pretty evident without details. The details are helpful and I look forward to learning more because I think it offers just great direction to us on how we could support further. But in regards to funding, I think it's something that we just really, we can't limit ourselves. So I wanted to thank you, Rich, though, despite that fact, for still being so willing to give us those details today and for working on that summary, which I very much so look forward to looking at. So thank you to staff. Thank you, colleagues, for bringing up those questions. And I yield the floor with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Chavez. I want to follow up with just a couple questions, kind of this conversation of how much detail that we need. Because if I'm understanding this correctly, right now our primary audience is we would like to get money from the state, and say they give us a bucket of money. Where does our ability to then allocate those dollars in a more specific and detailed manner come in? In other words, do we have to have specific projects, or do we need buckets that then we can, through our budgeting process, whether similar to what we did with ARPA or with our ARPA, or that we are doing with our ARPA dollars, or through our budget process, that then we get more into the granular details of specifically where these dollars go. So kind of deciding or understanding how much detail we need at this time to simply try to pull down the money from the state.
Councilor Cass, that's a good question. And I think that it's important to note that most of the folks don't want a lot of detail. They want to have a headliner that says this is what it's going to be, what a bucket is. If you look at our capital outlay piece, it is laid out, but it's very visual. There are a lot of photographs and some detail involved. And so what we're trying to do, to Councilor Chavez's point, is that we're trying not to limit ourselves, but at the same time, in our time crunch, in this one scenario, we're trying to give them some headliners to say, this is what the bucket would fit into. Here's what it would fit in from the standpoint. And then on the back end, I need to provide this August group with some detail that says, here's what the rationale for what those numbers were. And so it's 1 and 2. One is get the ask out there, and then 2 is that we can provide the details to the councilor's point that each of these provides some community impact or economic impact to the city of Santa Fe. That's the important piece that I want to relay to everyone. It provides community and economic impact to the city of Santa Fe. The details will be coming, but we wanted to make sure that we try to get in front. So we have a couple weeks left, and we said, this is the scenario that we were trying to run with. And so this is kind of where how the resolution was created and crafted.
Okay, that partially answers my question. I guess it comes down to, if we do get these money for, say the housing bucket, which we know that there's all these different programs, by passing this resolution here, we would not give up our appropriating power to essentially say, here's this bucket, and this is specifically where we want this to go through the budgeting process, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, these items will come back to this council and the committees again before they're even dispersed through an RFP. Well, I think they'll be discussed through the procurement process, but then when it gets to the RFP and contract process, they will come back through for robust debate before they're in an approval phase. These all fit into the buckets we have right now. Most of them do, and some are capital, but a lot of them are programmatic. So they will come through this council and committees again before it's signed on the line for us to engage any vendor or partner, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. I think that's important. And then I guess the other part of that question then, and maybe this might be a Director McCoy question, but what is then because there is this piece of responsibility for the state. The state has specifically given us money. So if we are proposing programs, would we have to go back to the state to get approval that said, does this fit in with your idea of what this bucket was supposed to be?
Madam Chair, that's a good question. It's the items here, keep in mind that the state has 4 available buckets. Not that they want to tell everybody they have 4 available buckets, but they essentially have 4 available buckets. This resolution was being pushed through this process for debate because we were looking at it from an ARPA funding standpoint or infrastructure standpoint with oil and gas, et cetera, additional capital outlay. So the state knows, or we ourselves would have to go through an eligibility process for a legal team and a procurement determination process to get this done. So these are basically bigger pictures, but they do, as I know of, they all fit into the eligibility that would go through 1 for ARPA, 2 for programmatic purposes, 3 for capital outlay. They all have different sieves that they would go through and they would pass through from that standpoint. They still have a lot of more processing and workflow to go, but they all would pass through in some way.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it is this really fine balance, especially given the scarcity of time of how we have as much of an understanding as we can of these dollars that we of course would like to go after and really seeing these benefits to the community, as well as the ability to really be thoughtful about how we spend them, our ability to spend them, and how that process would look. Although I suppose we kind of have some experience with that now with the CARES funding. We get this bucket, you have these items, and then we have to go through and now with ARPA as well. So I agree with Councilor Chavez that really looking at some opportunities to bring down dollars is crucial, and that it's going to be a balancing act of how much detail do we need right now, but the most important thing is how can we get these dollars out? And then we as a council, when we have those monies available, we really get to have a lot of those more detailed, more nuanced discussions. Yeah, I think those are all my comments for now. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually think those questions were helpful because it's not about limiting ourselves. I was actually under the assumption that the state actually needed more details instead of just giving them, hey, this is our pie in the sky, without having any details that we actually can make it actionable, that we have the capacity, that we have project management support. Those are the things I'm concerned about, because when I talked about it in finance, we have a lot of projects coming through the pipeline in the next couple of years that we need to finish. And Director Wheeler assured me that we have enough project management support. She said through the private sector, not so much our own staff, but those are the things that I think legislators would want to know, not because I'm trying to micromanage you all. It's because I want to know that we can do this. I would love all the money in the world, but when we actually like gets down to the pavement and actually like making it happen, that's where that's what gives me pause. And I thought actually legislators needed more details. So the fact that you're saying that they don't at this point, that's good to know. And that we would provide more details and it would go through the governing body later on. That I think that's helpful. So all those details weren't added, or we didn't talk about that last time. So that helps me have like understanding of the big picture. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could answer something that Councilor Rivera said, keep in mind on the ARPA side, it's really about eligibility. And so for the other buckets that may be out there, we will have to provide a lot of detail. But I think because there's a 30-day session and we're providing a resolution to sort of say, hey, can we make a one-pager? Because they're all looking for visual one-pagers. Can we put a one-pager together on this? But we need your support and a consent in order to do that. But this resolution sort of shows it as a headline. And so we know we need to get to the details ultimately, but was really this first path was to ARPA, and it had to be first, is it eligible? And from that standpoint, we can get into the standpoints.
Thank you, Rich. Councillor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just, after listening to all the discussion, it's a big ask and it's a lot of funds. And I see all the projects that are relevant and things that are needed in our communities. And I am interested to see, what is granted after the ask is done. And it's going to be interesting to see how we whittle it down and see where the money goes and how it's appropriated. That's going to be a good conversation between everyone. And just again, looking at the funding and how much is being asked for. At some point, I don't know what kind of possibility are we expected to use all the money once you receive it? And we got to look down the pipe, down the future, and say, hey, we run into another situation like we did now for COVID. Rainy day fund. I think those are just things that come to my mind when I'm looking at this type of money. So thank you for your time and all the information that you've given. I'll yield.
Sure. But Madam Chair, can I answer something that he asked a question? So Councilor Garcia, if this money is allocated and some of the capital projects may not be allocated through ARPA, we do have a time frame because the ARPA rules say it's beyond 2024. But if it's coming from an oil and gas fund, et cetera, I can ask Director Wheeler to speak to that because some of the capital outlay may have a perishable date. I don't know, but she could speak to that point from your question.
Thank you so much, Rich. Yes, the capital funds generally are required to be spent within 3 years, in some cases 4. Mm-hmm. And I could add that a lot of the details that we're desiring to understand about what kind of specific projects would be eligible for any particular funding that we received, and what kind of reporting or approval from the state might be required. We'll get a grant agreement generally, an in writing agreement that will have the terms and conditions for the funding, and that'll give us a lot of the things that we need to know, like the how long do we have to spend it, and what are the eligible expenses against the funding. And typically we get a lot of clarity there. And as I remember from one of our previous large fundings that we got from the state through CARES, we did check in with them on eligibility before we deployed funds. We thought, well, let's just check before we start doing this multi-million-dollar thing and make sure they feel good about it. And so sometimes with the state, there is that good back and forth to make sure that what we want to do is aligned with their vision and the eligibility criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wheeler. Councilor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I just want to speak to the point earlier in regards to details. about these items, and I think they serve two purposes. One of the purposes we've kind of been talking about, the details. Do the legislators need them or not? What is needed? I mean, ultimately, in my experience, and I'm sure that Mr. Duran can confirm this, the more details, the better. It helps them sell the product. It helps the legislator make that quick decision in regards to, yes, I support this, or no, sorry, I can't. I think it's critical that we provide Mr. Duran with as much tools as possible, given that we're giving him, roughly a week to attack this list. The second path of support is it helps us as the governing body determine, is this something we really support and we really want to include on this list? I mean, having a broad overview, we want, for example, some of the stuff, we don't know what it covers. And with so much broad strokes, there might be different intentions by staff, but we don't know, or different interpretations by us. And we just don't understand. And I think that's where the details come into play for us in understanding, is this something I think it's worthwhile to ask the resources for? On that point, if I want to speak to Councillor Lindell's amendment, she's asking for $8 million for the council districts. Okay, so is that $8 million broken up to 1 million per council district? Is it $8 million and we have a Royal Rumble and whoever wins or whoever is able to get the money spent out the door first gets that? And I think that's where details is critical. And I think with this and with the opportunity we have, almost a once in a lifetime opportunity where, we've got lots of resources available coming at us from all different angles. I like the path we're heading down, Rich, of having some of these materials and information ready to go, because it's going to be critical, if Build Back Better passes. We want to stay 2 steps ahead of the game and say, look, here it is. We've been planning this, and to use the words of Secretary Buttigieg, we've been using the word shovel ready a lot, but is it shovel worthy? And that's where the details come in. Are these really shovel worthy projects? So I think we don't want to minimize the information and how critical a role it plays, whether it's to our legislators or to us as the governing body members, as we're making the decision. Should this list be now 10 with potentially Councillor Lindell's amendment? Should it be lessened? I think, again, we want to make sure we're making smart choices, giving Mr. Duran the tools he needs, and making sure we're making smart decisions as a governing body. But thank you, Rich, and thank you everybody just for this. I think, I surely hope we can get some of these lists paid for. That'd be super awesome. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Garcia. Can you please take your hand down? Thank you. Okay, so we do have some amendments to consider, but we do need a main motion on the floor first. So what is the wishes of the committee?
I have a question, Madam Chair. Since we've reviewed, well, I guess I'm speaking to myself, so you guys could just brush me up and teach me. But since I've reviewed the amendments as we have in our packet, can a motion include the amendments? Or do we have to have a discussion about those first?
You could include a motion with amendments, but there is a chance that somebody might want to vote one way on an amendment and one way on a different amendment and one way on the other resolution. So typically we do a main motion and then we amend the main motion. I believe that there is a path, but our standard is to main motion on the primary resolution. Oh, wait, no, I think we've actually talked about this. We're not supposed to do that. We do a main motion and then we take each amendment one at a time. So no, we cannot.
So I motion to approve the resolution then.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Point of order.
Yes.
Maybe it's not a point of order. I'm using that.
Point of question.
Yeah. We also don't have to vote on the amendments at this time so that we could get more information about what the intention was, right?
So I was going to bring that up. With our new rules, we do need to take them up. However, this is the option I was going to give because I'm hearing a lot of people not ready to vote yes on them. If we all voted no as a committee, we would essentially kill them. Although we don't, we're trying to get away from that language, but we would, they would not move forward. We could move forward without recommendation, in which case they would not attach and they would kind of float along the way that they used to with our old process. So if all 5 of us voted no, though, they would not move forward as presented, which that's, of course, everybody can make their decision as to whether or not they would want that. That makes sense? Okay. So we have a motion and a second on the floor for the resolution. Are there any more discussions or questions about that motion specifically, not taking up the amendments yet? No. Oh, good. Did you hands? No.
Do we vote on that motion or then we entertain the amendments right now?
We need to, first we would have to do the amendments.
Okay.
So if that's the case, let's go ahead and move to Counselor Lindell's amendment, which I know that we have discussed, but I will go ahead and read it. On page 3, line 4, insert the following new paragraph. Item 7, $8 million for City Council district-led programs to address recovery and resiliency goals at the local level, including pathways to job training, neighborhood quality of life, return to work, and business productivity initiatives for residents and businesses who have been adversely affected by the COVID pandemic and subsequent economic downturn. Councillor Lindell is not here, but Jesse is here. So do we have any questions or comments about this?
Madam Chair, I think it would be helpful to have Councillor Lindell explain it to us in the next, I think this goes to, where does this go next? Public Works. Public Works and then the governing body. So I don't know if anyone has another idea, but I'm thinking of maybe it'd be best to move it without a recommendation so that we can still consider it in the subsequent or in the next committee discussion. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of the best way. I'd like to get more information.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I did speak to Councilor Lindell about this amendment, and I hope that I was able to articulate what she was thinking. But to Council Marco Garcia's point, I think her scenario was that it would be $1 million per district councilor that you would disperse those funds through. So that's how it came to $8 million, is that it would be $1 million per district councilor that would look for funding ideas that would come through the eligibility and procurement process for ARPA, if this comes through as ARPA.
Also, I want to correct myself. I'm getting text messages from the city attorney. Apparently, the amendment could be moved again if we did vote no. So we could potentially vote no, or we can move forward without recommendation, and they could move it again at another committee, or somebody could move it again. So, but still, Councilwoman Villarreal, do you have a motion? Is that a motion to move it forward without recommendation?
I guess I was wanting to hear from my colleagues because I would like more information. Maybe you all don't, but I just wanted to understand how it functions. I like the idea. I mean, we all would get $1 million, not personally, but for our district. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just yield the floor to see if anyone else has any comments.
Anybody else have thoughts on this?
If I can just maybe ask a question.
Guys, can you raise hands and I'll call on you as we do? There we go. Councillor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the discussion over the amendment to this resolution, which is being presented by Councilor Lindell, who is not here. And I believe so the discussion on this would be, we want more detail in terms of how this amendment is worded. Is that kind of what we're headed towards? Do we put the wording in there, but then if you put wording in there, you're changing your amendment. So I think that kind of is appropriate to maybe ask for that rewrite of this because we're not clear on that. So is that kind of what where you're headed towards, Councilor Villarreal?
Madam Chair, may I answer that?
Yes, go ahead, Councilor.
So I think what I was going for is, I'm okay with the way the wording is. I was just trying to understand how the amendment, when it's added to the overall resolution, would be operationalized. Like how that money then, I don't know if we need to figure that out. I just wanted to hear kind of the thought process about that. Like how would this work for us? Because we've never had this before. So that was kind of what I was thinking.
And so again, I think that still goes back to the discussion earlier in regards to details. I know this is more of an ask. And at what point do we have the discussion over, once we have the money in hand, how does it work? And I think that's, again, going to be another conversation that's going to be interesting for all of us to have. And so I really don't know where, it's still at this point goes into the initial asking point, whether we get it or not. And how does that go to the next committee and finally governing body? And how does that all come full circle with what's being presented to the legislature for this? And I don't know, that might be a question for Director Brown.
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, I'm not really sure about the legislative process, but Jesse Guillen can really easily walk us through what the next steps would be. So I'm going to ask Mr. Guillen to sort of talk through
that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I missed the question. I'm sorry. Can someone repeat that for me?
Yeah, I think that back again, there's been discussion over details. And at this point, what we're trying to do is put together the total ask, right, of money appropriated to us from the funding that's coming through from the legislature. And so without getting too far into detail of all of these, we want to know what those details are, but how does it affect the overall end result of us asking the legislature for this money? And I think that's what the whole idea here was. Did that make any sense? I'm still trying to put it together in terms of the overall ask, and then now with this resolution being presented to us without the person who wrote the resolution not at this meeting.
The amendment, not the resolution.
The amendment, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'm not entirely sure how to answer that. The amendment would just be inserted and add that I believe 8 million in there. How it would affect our ask at the legislature, I think, is more of a question for Mark Duran than for me, since he, is the one that's going to be asking the legislature for this additional funding. So I guess I don't know if that answers your question.
I'm just trying to get to the next step of either moving forward with this resolution included in the motion, or do we just move it on to the next committee? And I think that was the discussion that we were having. Is that correct?
The
Madam
amendment.
Chair, Council.
Sorry,
Councilor
not
Garcia.
the amendment. Yeah.
The amendment. I apologize.
Yeah, I think you have the option of just, if you want more information about it, you can move it forward with no recommendation. It's a good question on if, I'm not entirely sure of the answer to if, what happens if you don't take it up. I think maybe it may have the same effect as voting no recommendation if you just don't vote on it at all. That's something I'd have to check with Aaron, because I don't know that we necessarily discussed that. So I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer on that right now. My presumption would be that it would still go forward, but it not attached to the legislation, as unlike if you voted in favor of it.
Madam Chair, this is Elizabeth. May I ask a procedural question to clarify something? I can't hold my hand up because the host has taken off my video, so I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
But, and maybe Jesse can help answer this question too. I know you know, but you have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the resolution. And I don't believe you can take another motion on the floor before you vote on the motion and the second they're on the floor right now. You can have discussion, but I don't believe you can. I mean, you can discuss the resolutions, but I don't think you can make a motion. I mean, the amendments, but I don't think you can make a motion on the amendment before you take care of the motion on the floor.
We can. I'm not sure how it translates in PrimeGov, but that is our practice, that we have the main motion for the primary resolution, and then we amend the main motion by voting on those amendments. So that is how we have been doing it for.
So this is a new process?
I'm not sure if it's a new process. It's what I have been doing at the governing body for the at least the 2 years I've been here. So
right, I just wanted to be sure. It just didn't seem to flow right. Okay.
No problem.
Excuse my question.
No problem. So I'm gonna, do you mind if I take a stab at clarifying your question, Councilor Garcia?
Yes.
I believe what you're asking right now is that it sounds like we need more information on this. And so what are our next steps? So we can either vote to send it forward to Public Works with no recommendation, in which case it'll just keep going. We could, if we voted to approve it, it would attach to the resolution as it is written. If we vote to deny it, that depends on what the denial looks like. And I'm getting some different information from different people about what that actually looks like. It sounds like it would still float along. What Councilwoman Villarreal was discussing is, would we like to move this forward with no recommendation? Because at this point, it sounds like members of the governing or members of the Quality of Life Committee have questions about the intent behind the amendment that really only the sponsor of the amendment can properly answer. And she is not here to answer those questions. So shall we move it forward without recommendation in order to have a more robust and complete discussion on it when Councilor Lindell is available for those questions? Did that help?
Yeah, and I think that's smart. I mean, I'm in favor of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Did you have any other further questions or comments?
No, I'll yield. Thank you.
Councilor Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering on this because I feel like to get operational answers, the funds would have to be available to the city councilors, and they have a plan on how they would be using those funds within their district. So I feel, and this is just my thought process and anyone could chime in, but I would think that we would be the ones that would determine operational needs based on how we would utilize those funds if given those funds. So I'm sure Councilor Lindell could give us details on how she would probably use her portion and what operational needs would be there. But really, I feel like to get down to that operational level, it would be funds in hand, needs assessment of our district and us responding with a plan and working with staff to get something complete in utilization of those funds. So that's kind of where my thought process is. If I'm way off, because I'm just wondering, like, how much more detail can Councilor Lindell give us for how we would possibly use those funds? I don't know if she would be able to, But I will say that's where my thought process is. Am I correct on that, or am I missing a piece? So I just am wondering. That would be difficult to provide operational details if we as counselors haven't presented plans on how we would utilize our portion, correct?
I think I know I can speak for myself in the questions that I have here. It just says $8 million for city council district led. Does that mean $1 million per counselor, $2 million per district? It has kind of these specific buckets that are putting into, and especially when we're talking ARPA dollars and the buckets and the qualifications for those. I know that those are some of the questions that I have that I'd want clarity on what her intent was, or is it $8 million and then as a 8-person city council, we're all sitting there vying to like pull them into our different districts. So as it's currently written, I don't find that terribly clear, but not necessarily when it comes down to brass tacks. Do these dollars go, do I get as a counselor say, all right, I have $1 million and I want this $1 million to go to grants for businesses in District 4 or childcare, if we're following me being an example, childcare initiatives in the city. So it's less about how it's operationalized there, but for me about how it gets divided. Councilwoman Villarreal, you had started this discussion. Did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair. I guess the way it's typically works, so you all know, when you have an amendment, you typically show up to talk about your amendment, even if you're not in the committee. So this is what's a little challenging for me for both of those. And if you can't show up, you can't always show up for other committees you're not part of, but you can let your colleagues know, someone to be able to have more details to be able to champion it for you or have more ability to talk about it. So that's kind of where I'm at. I feel like we can move forward with the current motion and these amendments will still move to the next committee without us having to vote on them. So maybe we should take that route instead of saying without a recommendation, because they'll continue on through the process. They'll go to the Public Works and then they'll go into governing body. And then we all will have, I think, a chance to understand what the reasoning, what the intention was for the amendments. Because I mean, in theory, I think they both make sense. If I knew a little bit more, I would probably support them. But I think in my opinion, being on the council, usually it's helpful when we get the actual person who's carrying the amendment to be able to talk to us about it. So I'm willing to move with this current motion and then let the amendments continue on to the next committee.
Thank you, Councilor Villarreal. I think that makes sense. Now that I know that usually we have the sponsors of the amendments showing up to give information, I agree with that as well.
And I will say, to be fair, in our old process, before we did the updated procedural rules, we often would just let them fly and not discuss them and sometimes sponsors would not show up. And this is something that I always said, we'll find out where we made mistakes. This might be a place that we did not think about this type of scenario. So I know that I'll be convening with Aaron and talking in more detail about this because we did make the change with the updated procedure rules that it attaches. So this is a great question. And thank you everybody for this exercise. And we will continue to be exploring this as we perfect our new procedural processes. So thanks for all being part of this experiment. That being said, would anybody like to make a motion on either of the amendments? And if not, we can move to Councilor Rivera's amendment if anybody has any questions or comments there. And if not, then we can go ahead and vote on the main motion. And I will be talking to Erin and getting her advice. So Elizabeth, can we please get a roll call?
Yes, Councilor Villarreal.
Yes.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Yes.
Councilor Lee Garcia.
Yes.
Councilor Chavez.
Yes.
Chair Cassette.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for that exercise, and thank you, Rich, for staying with us through that exercise, and Jesse as well. I appreciate that.
Madam Chair, before we leave this, I know that I still would like the details that Rich Brown was preparing. So you know that, but I'm just reiterating that. Thank you.
Yes, it might be this weekend, but I'm getting it to you.
Thank you. We have no other items pulled off consent. We have no discussion items, no executive session. On to matters from staff.
Director, I don't have any matters from the staff right now.
Wonderful. Thank you. And number 11, matters from committee. Nope. Okay. Item 12, matters from the chair. Again, thank you for this fun experiment and discussion. And then our next meeting is Wednesday, February 16th, 2022 at 5 p.m. And with that,